Opening credits. Playing the bosses. Workplace office romance. By Selena Coffey. Auto-narrated, using Google technology. Part 1. Chapter 1. Jess Bilson walked out of the courtroom feeling like she could take on the world. She had just won her first high-profile case, and it had been a bear. The defendant, Mary Casey, pop singer beloved by millions, had just been acquitted of all charges of shooting her boyfriend, pop singer Mark Sills, to death after he hit her one too many times. The jury had ruled in favor of the self-defense plea that Jess had been arguing. Jess had been thrilled beyond belief when she was given the assignment. She had no idea how much work it was going to be, but she took it all in stride and committed herself to working around the clock to make this a huge win for her firm. The legal fees that Mary Casey had paid towards her freedom were a staggering $8 million. It had been the highest profile case of the year, and the fact that Jess had been chosen to lead the team was beyond anybody's expectations. Jess was only 4 years out of Harvard Law, but during that time she had worked her tail off to prove herself. She routinely put in 90-hour weeks with the firm, and often did more. She also had won every single case she had been assigned, starting off with minor felonies, and then working her way up to murder cases. She had a perfect track record of 24-0. The thing that made her stand out among her peers, she loved to win. She loved to play the game, and she treated every case as a wonderful game that she had to master. Each was an exciting chess game with a different strategy and a different game plan that had to be worked out. Jess had learned long ago that everything in life must be approached this way, because everything was a competition. Jess unbuttoned the button on her blazer and let out a sigh of relief, allowing her large belly to have some room at last. It wasn't easy finding suits that made her look this good, which was a burden that all bigger girls had to deal with. Jess made no fuss about it, but she had always been a bigger woman. She actually reveled in it, and she felt that it made her an even bigger force to be reckoned with in her career. She was living proof that sexy and powerful was all in the attitude. She was a pretty woman, but she knew that if she were shy and introverted about her body, then she would never have the kind of success she wanted in life, in business or romance. Jess had never had problems with men not being attracted to her large curves, her fleshy backside, or her amazing
censored,
which was what she was most proud of, and could make men drool or have traffic accidents if she left them on display. She smiled at the thought, and remembered how much power all women could have over men if they just embraced their
censored
nature a little more. When she got back to the office, the whole place was abuzz with the news of her win. She basked in the adulation and the jealousy of her so-called peers as she made her way to her cramped office. She was a fourth-year associate, and she wondered how much longer she would have to deal with a small office. With the win on the Casey case, she was starting to feel that an elevation in status was in order. She sat down behind her desk and grabbed a bottle of mineral water from her mini fridge. It was fully stocked as always. She immediately began doing some work on the discovery aspects of the next case she had in line. No rest for the wicked, she thought. Discovery was where all the evidence was examined and presented during the pre-trial process. Many cases were won or lost right there, so it was imperative that it be done right. It was a
censored
assault suit. A dental hygienist was accusing her boss, Dr. David Morse, of inappropriate
censored
misconduct of his patients while they were under anesthesia. He had paid her off for over a year to keep quiet about his indiscretions, but a few of the patients had filed complaints that they had evidence of his activities while under sedation. Obviously, he wanted all of this kept quiet since he was a highly respected dentist in Beverly Hills, who had a thriving practice and several sports cars that he had to pay for. And then there was the prison thing. He wanted to avoid that, apparently. She was just getting into her routine and starting to get some great work done when a knock came at her door. She looked up and saw Kelly Kaufman, Alex Mather's secretary, standing there. "Hey, Kelly. What's up?" Jess asked. "Alex wants to see you in his office." "Okay, thanks." Jess took another sip of her water and began the long walk down the hall and up the stairs to Alex's office. She was a bit concerned as to why he wanted to see her. Was it just to congratulate her? He usually just did that through a simple email, or if he passed her in the hall first, he would give her a nod about it, but this was a huge win for the firm. She had to admit that she was a little nervous. There was something about being in the boss's office that made her feel like a little kid being sent to see the principal. Although none of her principals had ever been as hot as Alex Mathers. He was 36, tall, handsome with a devilish smile that made you want to melt because you just knew he was up to no good. Jess had never been one to chase after bad boys, but for some reason, they always seemed to be the ones that ended up in her bed. There was something about the swagger and the
censored
nature of a bad boy that just made you want to surrender to them. You could see the I don't give a damn attitude in the way they walked, the way they talked, and in the gleam in their eye. It was a very intoxicating package. She had noticed Alex giving her gushy and flirtatious glances ever since she had started working for the firm 4 years ago. He was one of the founding partners, and he was amazing at what he did. She had been privileged enough to sit in on several big negotiation meetings with Alex, and he always amazed her by the way he just so nonchalantly persuaded people to see things his way. He never got upset or lost his cool in any way. He relied on a cold, calculating instinct that used others' emotions against them. Jess had been attracted to him from the moment she laid eyes on him, but she wasn't one to mess around at work. Work was to be kept completely separate from her outside social life, which she didn't really have time for. Her family kept wondering when she was going to meet the right guy and settle down, but for now she was having too much fun winning at work. She had the occasional male visitor who would keep her company when she was in the mood, but they also knew enough to go away when they were no longer needed. That was the way she liked things. Relationships had always been too complicated to deal with. As far as she was concerned, it was too much risk for too little reward. She had known Alex had a thing for her from pretty much the first week she had worked at the firm. He had allowed his gaze to linger too long and inappropriately at her,
censored
and her ass on more than one occasion. She had been flattered and took the whole thing in stride. She knew there were jittery women who would have been flabbergasted and reported such a thing, but Jess enjoyed the attention. Her hard work and determination had catapulted her to where she was, and it would take her even higher one day, but using what the good Lord gave you was just icing on the cake. Alex had been married at the time, but he had recently gone through a messy divorce. Rumor had it that it was because he was messing around with someone else, which Jess knew to be much more than just a rumor. Alex was not only a cad, he was a shameless one, and he didn't try to hide his personal life from anyone. But being the brilliant attorney that he was, there was no chance in hell his ex-wife could lay her hands on any more of his money than he had decided was fair. That was too bad because the man was loaded. Jess knocked on the door to his office, waited for his response, and entered with a laid-back smile on her face. She was instantly distracted by the look in his eyes and his chiseled good looks. The man was sexy beyond belief. It even rattled her sometimes, and she never got rattled by anything. She prided herself on being in total control at all times, but something happened when she looked into his eyes that left her feeling vulnerable and open to suggestion. She had often dreamed of making love to Alex, but she would never have allowed herself to be the one to initiate an over-the-line move like that. If you did that, then you automatically relinquished control to the other person. That was never going to happen to Jess. "Jess, have a seat," Alex said. His voice was smooth as silk, and it sent shivers down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was attraction or fear. They often felt similar when you were in a room with Alex Mathers. "Thanks," she said, taking a seat across from him. He didn't speak for a few moments. He just smiled and looked at her, as if sizing her up for something. She tried to remain poised and continue to keep his gaze and not lose the power struggle that was in place. She couldn't take it any longer and dropped her gaze for a second. When she quickly glanced back up, Alex's smile widened. So you've had quite the day, Alex said. Yeah, it turned out pretty well for us. Not just for us, but for you as well. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what a huge win that was today. No, you don't. I'm just glad that the cards went our way. We definitely had the right person for the job, Alex said. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the opportunity. We've been working together 4 years, and I've asked you repeatedly not to call me sir. Plain old Alex will do just fine. I'm sorry, Alex. She had always felt pretty odd about calling a boss by their first name. She thought she was getting better with it, but apparently it still needed some more work. When I first approached the senior associates and dean about putting you on the case, I was given many strange looks. It is an unusual thing to put a 4th year on one of the biggest cases the firm has ever had, but I had faith in you. Thanks, Alex. I had wondered why I was given the opportunity, but I'm more than grateful for it. I see something very special in you, Jess. You remind me of myself when I started out at Davis and Riley, before Dean and I ventured into business together. I love to see ambition, and I love to see talent mixed in with it. I find it exciting, fun, and dare I say sexy. Jess felt herself blush a bit when he said the word sexy. She wasn't entirely sure why. It had to be the animal magnetism the man projected behind every movement and every gesture. Well, I guess that is one way to put it, Jess said. Alex smiled that bulletproof flag of confidence. So, what are you doing tonight to celebrate? Alex asked. Jess had to stop and think for a moment. She had not made any plans, actually. She figured she should probably do something, but she had work to do, as always, and she was looking forward to unwinding at the end of the day with a few drinks and some Chinese takeout. This was pretty much what she did after every day. She was starting to realize that she had no social life whatsoever sometimes. No plans, really. I have a lot of work to do, getting ready for that Jones case. Oh yeah. That looks like a fun one. I swear I love what we do because of all of the entertaining things we get to learn about, what people do to each other. It never ceases to amaze me, and I've been doing this a while. Jess laughed. I guess that's true. We do keep ourselves entertained, Jess said. Well, I think you can take one night off and have a little fun. In fact, as your boss, I demand it, Alex said. Okay, I'll do that. To make sure you follow my orders, I'm taking you out tonight. Jess swallowed hard. She tried not to let the surprise show on her face or in her voice, but she was suddenly extremely nervous. Alex had just asked her out. Asked, being a loose term here, but he was setting up a date between the two of them. Jess had thought about this on more than one occasion, and she'd had fun with the harmless flirtation that had gone on between them for a long time, but she had never seriously thought it would end up as anything other than that. Now here he was asking her out. She was finding it hard not to blush like a schoolgirl as she continued to stare into his eyes, but she kept her strong hold on her emotions just as she always did. She prided herself on being a closed book with a lock on it. No one could read her poker face. It had taken years of careful structuring to master the ability to turn that on at will. Okay, I guess if it's an order then I have to follow it, Jess joked back. Alex continued to smile at her and lock her into a power struggle of eye contact. His eyes were magnetic, and they tended to hypnotize you if you stared into them too long. Good. I'll pick you up at 7. Have you been to Spagno's? I have not been there, but I have heard great things. It's amazing. It is by far the best Italian food on this side of the city. That sounds great. So I'll see you then? Jess said. She got up to leave, and Alex quickly came out from behind his desk to walk her to the door. Right before she opened the door, Alex grabbed her arm gently and pulled her towards him. Her first instinct was to recoil in shock, but she didn't. This was happening, and she decided she was perfectly okay with it. Alex pulled her close and
censored
her on the lips. It was just a slow peck really, but it broke the ice on their current relationship status, and definitely ushered in the arrival of a new path for them to follow, together. Jess smiled at him, letting her gaze linger on him a bit longer as she stepped out into the hallway. She felt like she needed a cigarette right then, and she wished she had not quit 3 years ago. But it was going to take more than
censored
from the invincible and perfect Alex Mathers for her to break her nicotine recovery. She discovered that she was smiling from ear to ear and she could not stop. It was like a floodgate of endorphins had opened up inside of her body, and she felt like she was literally glowing. Others smiled at her as she walked down the hall, as if they thought she was smiling at them, but she barely even looked at them as she made her way back to her desk. She turned on the small stereo she kept in her office and sat back to enjoy the moment. It was definitely going to be an interesting evening. Chapter 2. Hey Jess. Jess was almost to her car when she heard a loud voice not far from her. The voice sounded familiar, and as she turned her head she smiled at the image of Dean Clark walking towards her in the lot, the sun wrapping around his body, creating an image of a golden god almost. And she knew that Dean would never disagree with that image. Dean was not someone with a small ego. He had a very high opinion of himself, but he did not openly display this to most people with the bravado that someone like Alex did. They were both hard-working, highly competitive alpha males, but Dean seemed to enjoy the more laid-back and stoic approach to domination. He was a brilliant attorney and a great man to work for, as long as you busted your ass with as much determination and vigor as Jess did. If you weren't prepared to give your soul to the company, then you were not going to last long at Mathers and Clark. Jess had seen many associates fall by the wayside because they wanted to spend evenings and weekends with their families. Well, that sort of crap was just not going to cut it around here, and Dean and Alex both warned associates about this on day one. Most thought they were kind of kidding, they weren't. By the time you figured that out, you were being shown the door. How's it going, Dean? Jess asked. Dean continued to slowly stroll towards her. He was not a man who ever got in a hurry. Everything revolved around him, and he approached the world with a cool and calculating manner. Jess admired him in a lot of ways. She loved the contrast between Dean and Alex. Where Alex was rather flashy and glib, Dean was more reserved, and when he did speak, everyone hung on every word. And Dean was sexy as hell. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair that was neatly cropped in a hip but still conservative short cut. His suits were perfectly tailored to fit his ripped and muscular physique. Even working over 100 hours a week was not enough to deter Dean from engaging in 2-hour workouts every morning. Jess wished she had the same kind of dedication to her body and health as she did to her job. She would be a lot fitter, but she was still very happy with her curvy body. No man had ever complained. So, how does it feel to be a rock star? Dean asked. Oh, I'd hardly call myself a rock star. You hit it out of the park. I love the fake modesty, but no one's around. You can admit you are without a doubt a total badass. Jess smiled at the compliment. Well, yeah, I guess I am. That's right. We are both really proud of how well you are doing, Dean said. Thanks. I appreciate it. What are you doing tonight? Surely you got plans to paint the town red? Not exactly. What? It's Friday night, and you are coming off of the biggest win the firm might see all year. Well, I do have some plans. Dean suddenly seemed slightly disappointed. Oh, well, that's great. Yeah, Alex is actually taking me to dinner to celebrate. Oh, Alex is? Well, I hope you guys have fun. I'm sure we will. Well, since I'm too late for tonight, let me take you out tomorrow night. I really should get some work done, Jess said. Now you are starting to sound like me. You are much too young to be sounding like me, Dean said, even though he was only 37 and looked 30. Well, you don't get to be a rock star by accident, Jess replied. Dean laughed heartily. He had an amazingly infectious laugh. It took up the entire space all around you. It was the typical laugh of a relaxed, confident alpha male. It inspired and comforted all the while. It instilled a bit of fear in you. That is true, but I'm taking you out tomorrow night anyway. I'll accept no excuses, Dean said. Jess smiled. She was wondering what had aligned in the cosmos to conspire to put this thing together. First Alex, and now Dean was asking her out. Was it all because of the case? She knew that Alex and Dean, either one, could take their pick of women in the world, but she was starting to get the picture that beauty was not nearly enough to keep guys like them interested. They needed a challenge. They needed a strong and successful woman. It kind of made sense when you really thought about it. They were the cream of the crop when it came to men, and they expected nothing less from the women in their lives. She was suddenly feeling even more privileged, knowing that she had passed a series of tests to live up to their ridiculously high standards. She knew that on some level she should be appalled at the shallow behavior, but she felt great about it. It was an odd confidence boost, and she found herself intrigued by how this sort of thing could play out. Could she really date them both? And for how long? Was she getting ahead of herself a bit? It was just a dinner date with each of them. Who knew if anything better than that would happen? Okay, it's a date, Jess said. I'll pencil you in my appointment book, Dean said. He mocked as if he was writing in a book in the palm of his hand. Jess laughed at the cheese of the joke. Only a guy like Dean could pull off something that lame, but he made it look cute and suave. He had a sweet way about him. That's great. I'll see you tomorrow, Dean. Jess tasted the pasta and felt her entire mouth tingle with pleasure. It was truly the most amazing thing she had ever placed between her lips, and she felt as if her entire mouth was coming alive with flavor and pleasure. She took her time with the food, really enjoying the flavor and allowing it to build up inside of her senses. Alex glanced across the table at her with a smirk. He was enjoying her reaction as he took a mouthful of his chicken marsala. It was a bit distracting, but she tried to pay him no heed. The restaurant was fantastic and she wondered why she had never been there before, but then again Jess did not date a lot. There was too much work to be focusing on. Even right then, she was having a bit of difficulty relaxing enough to ignore the mountains of work that she had to do to get ready for Monday. She knew that Alex and Dean both enjoyed the nightlife, and they were often running around town. It seemed they both had the energy of 10 men, because with as much as they worked and as hard as they played, you had to wonder when they found time to sleep. Jess was fairly certain that they both often came into the office without sleeping the night before. She would have dropped dead after a few days of that. So what brought you to the practice of law? Alex asked. Jess paused a few moments before answering. It was kind of a strange question to be asked by your boss 4 years after you started working. She believed he had asked her that question when she was hired, but she did not remember the answer she had given him then. It was hard to know if he was just making conversation, or if he remembered what she had said before, and was trying to see if her answer had changed at all since then. I have always loved the environment. I love the legal system, and I fully believe it works when it is worked right. People like to blame the system for failing, but I believe people fail the system. Sorry, not trying to wax all intellectual and poetic-like, Jess said. Alex seemed pleased with her answer. He took a sip of his Merlot and leaned back in his chair. That's a great answer, and I have to agree completely. So, do you see yourself sticking with us in the long term? I'm sure you will be partner one day, at the rate you are going. You have started down a beautiful path. I would love that. I enjoy where I'm at, and I believe in what we stand for as a firm and the mission statement we are trying to accomplish and hold up. Wow, you are just full of great words tonight, Alex said. He poured more wine into her cup and his own. Are you trying to get me drunk? Jess joked. No, I am getting you drunk. Jess laughed. She loved the way he just assumed that the world would bend to his will, but he did it with such class and grace that it was utterly charming. Oh, really? Why would you want me drunk? Jess asked. She was hoping to make him squirm by forcing him to answer an awkward question. Because it's hard to celebrate properly without some liquid fun, Alex said. Jess found herself blushing and reaching for the wine glass. So what are your thoughts on the Jones case? Jess asked. Alex smiled. No. 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 We are not talking about a case tonight. You are celebrating and enjoying yourself. Tonight is all about having a good time. Well, I have a good time when I talk about work, Jess said. You have to get out more. If you don't stop and take some time for yourself, then you will wake up one day to find that your life has passed you by. Jess paused a moment and gave some thought to what he was saying. She realized that he was right, but she was still young. She knew that what she wanted to do was climb the ladder of success in her chosen field. She was willing to do what she had to in order to make that happen. She wondered right then if that was really why she had accepted dinner invitations from both partners of the firm. This coming from the man who doesn't sleep, Jess said. Hey, I never said it was easy. If you spend too much time with your eyes closed, then life will also pass you by, he joked. I agree, Jess said, finishing off the wine. So, how about you? What made you want to be a lawyer? Jess asked. I love power and money, and it seemed like an easy way to achieve both. Plus, I love to win. It is the ultimate power game, isn't it? Wow, that's an extremely honest answer. Well, I'm an honest guy. What you see is what you get. Jess smiled at that. She had seen the way he nonchalantly fired off answers to any question he was asked. It was almost like firing bullets at him, only to have them bounce right back at you. She wished she possessed that level of confidence, but she was working on it. She wondered if someone like Alex was just born with it, or if he had to work to obtain it. Finishing up her dinner, she excused herself to the ladies' room where she checked her makeup in the mirror and made sure her hair was still kicking sexy. Everything still seemed to be dynamite, and she had to give herself a high five for wearing the power dress tonight. That was the one dress she had that always made her look stunning. It was elegant and classy, with just a touch of slutty that made the whole thing very appealing. Even walking to the bathroom, she had seen 3 different guys checking her out while their anorexic girlfriends glared at her. She adjusted her
censored
slightly, making the girls stand up a little more. Her cleavage was lacking just a bit. She smiled at a job well done and in admiration for her large
censored
assets. They were always there when she needed them. What the hell are you doing? The voice came from behind her. She spun around, seeing a woman standing behind her, a look of evil intent on her face. The woman was tall, slender, and attractive, or she would have been if her face wasn't scowled up with rage. What? Jess asked. She relaxed her posture and took a step forward. Jess didn't frighten easily, and she sure as hell wasn't going to be intimidated by some Barbie doll with an obvious meth addiction. What are you doing? You are out with my man. Excuse me? I don't know what you are talking about. If he were your man, then you would be out with him and not me. I'm telling you for the last time to stay away from him. He belongs to me, the woman said, her voice filled with malice and rage. Jess laughed. She loved it when people got so worked up over something so silly. Excuse me, but I'm on a date, Jess said as she spun away and walked out of the restroom. When she got back to the table, she mentioned the altercation to Alex. He had ordered another bottle of wine and had just poured the first glass. She expected him to be shocked or to deny that he ever knew the woman. That had been her experience with men. They lied and cheated and then lied about cheating. That sounds like Veronica, Alex said. Veronica? Well, she may have gotten the wrong idea about us, Jess said. Oh, I'm thinking she has the right idea about us, he said, winking at her. She felt her heart speed up a little bit and willed it to stop. Damn, he knew how to flip her attraction switches. Veronica and I used to go out, briefly. That was about the time I learned that she was clingy, possessive, and mildly psychotic. Mildly? I'd hate to see a real psycho then, Jess replied. Alex smiled. Well, in the game of love, there are bound to be some casualties. It isn't pretty, but it happens. Is everything a game to you? Jess said, shaking her head. The guy was so smooth it was unbelievable. Yeah, everything in life is a game. That's the way you have to look at it. If you take it too seriously, it all starts to suck. Life is about fun. Even when you are working, you should be having fun. If you aren't, then you are doing it wrong. When it comes to people and relationships, I feel the same way. People have me figured out wrong. They think I'm some sort of douchebag player. Aren't you? Jess asked. No, I'm very open and honest with people. In fact, I'm too honest sometimes. I told Veronica that I wasn't looking for anything serious when we started fooling around. She used to be a paralegal at the firm, but when she wouldn't take no for an answer and started stalking me, then I had to let her go. I hated to do it. Jess wasn't sure if she swallowed everything that was coming out of his mouth, but she could tell that Veronica was an obvious nut. She herself had dealt with a weirdo or two in her quest for love, which wasn't much of a quest when you factored in all the time she spent not thinking about it and not pursuing it. I can handle that, Jess said. Good, Alex replied. He smiled that $1,000,000 smile at her and leaned back in his chair. He seemed to be very satisfied and happy with the fact that she was not the least bit rattled by what was going on. Next, Alex decided to take her dancing at an exclusive club. He had really decided to pull out all of the stops to impress her tonight, it seemed. She was just fine with that. Jess just smiled and sat back ready to enjoy the ride. Chapter 3. Jess pushed herself away from the computer and leaned back in her plush office chair, stretching her back deeply. She let out a huge yawn and really sank into the relaxation of it all. For the past 3 hours, she had been glued to her office chair working on the Jones case. The discovery process had gone well, and now she was working on all of the questions and possible scenarios that needed to be in place in order for her to trample the prosecution on the next step of the trial. She had shut everything off and allowed herself to become immersed in the details of the work, and she had worked longer than she had intended to without a break. That was a bit of a problem with her, and she suddenly realized that she had not had lunch or dinner yet. This wasn't that unusual either, but now she was feeling her blood sugar crashing, and she knew she had to get something in her fast. She went down the hall to the vending machine and bought a bag of chips and a coffee. She figured that would tide her over until she got home and had some real food. She had pizza leftovers for tonight. A noise in the other room garnered her attention. She moved back from the vending machine and noticed Dean working in the other room making copies. She was not at all surprised to see him working this late. It was past 8 at night. She had actually not had a chance to speak with him since their date. It had been an interesting contrast to the date she'd had Friday with Alex. While Alex was overtly
censored
and arrogant, albeit in a sexy way, if that made sense, Dean was much more urbane and suave. He kind of reminded her of Daniel Craig as James Bond. He actually looked a bit like him, but much taller. Same intense gaze and steady flowing movements. It sent the message that he was in control, and you were going to have to be okay with it, because he was going to take great care of you. Just like that. It had been a long time since anyone had bothered to take care of her. She had been taken aback by how subtly funny Dean actually was on their date. They had gone to a wine mixer, and Dean had introduced her to several people of note in the area, most of them wealthy business owners, and a few minor celebrities. If she had not been so used to keeping these people out of jail, then she might have been a bit impressed. It also turned out that Dean was a snazzy dancer. There had been a section of the wine mixer that had actually been set aside for dancing with one of the hottest DJs in the area. Dean had taken control and moved her body in ways she was not sure it had ever moved before. The way he danced was very seductive and censored. It really felt like he was making love to you and the music. By the end of the night, she had been ready for just about anything, and she meant anything. But Dean, as it turns out, was a perfect gentleman. He had dropped her off at her place with a sweet,
censored,
and said goodnight. She had almost invited him up, but she could tell that he wouldn't have accepted the invitation. It was rather peculiar, but she decided she liked that, and it made her want him more. She was really looking forward to their next date. She was also looking forward to the next date with Alex. He had arranged for them to go skydiving. She had never been, and it sounded terrifying, but the way he described it had made the whole thing sound so exciting that it made her want to try it. Jess had never been afraid of trying new things, and she certainly wasn't going to pass up an opportunity like that. Dean had not asked her out again. He was either very old-fashioned, or he was just playing a bit of hard to get with her. She knew that he wanted her. She had felt his cold, seductive gaze on her for the past few months. She had even started to dress a little sexier on days when they had scheduled important meetings. It was fun for Alex and Dean both to get an eyeful of her and to watch them squirm. No, Jess did not consider herself a tease in any way. She was just having fun, and she was doing it for all the big girls out there. "Jess, is that you?" She had just been about to walk back to her desk when Dean called out to her. He had apparently caught her watching him, and he probably thought she was totally checking him out, which she was. Oh well, she was just going to have to wing it. She put on her sexiest smile and slowly walked into the copy room, carefully accentuating her curves with every bouncing step she took. He looked like his eyes might pop out of his head. This late in the day, when everyone had pretty much gone home, Jess liked to remove the restrictive blazer and just wear her blouse. The blouse was a bit see-through, and it revealed the lacy bra she wore underneath that barely covered her large.
Censored.
It was comfortable, so she wore it under the hot blazer all day. It seemed to keep the sweating to a minimum, and no one was the wiser until she took it off. Then it was party time. Or in her case, it was time to do a massive amount of prep work and sifting through paperwork. "Hey there. Why am I not surprised to find you still here?" Jess asked. "Probably the same reason I am not surprised to find you still here," he replied. "Well, I guess workaholics stick together," Jess said with a smile. "I had a great time the other night," Dean said. "I'd love to take you out again soon. I thought it was just a one-time celebration. It started that way, but I think it deserves to be something else." Jess smiled coyly at him, walking a bit closer, allowing him to smell her perfume and catch some more cleavage out of his peripheral. "I like the sound of that," Jess said. She was starting to feel very aroused. Maybe it was the intense focus on the work she had just been doing. For some odd reason, it often put her in the mood. Dean's eyes glazed over with
censored.
He looked at her intently, staring deep into her eyes and through her being. It was very
censored,
and she could hardly recall when she had felt the presence of attraction that was hotter than it was right now. She found herself leaning in closer to him. "I have been thinking about this for a while," Dean said. He pulled her close and
censored
her softly. "I know," Jess said. "Do you? Well, then I take it you have thought about it a time or two as well?" "Maybe," Jess said between
censored.
"Maybe," they
censored
again, deeper and firmer. "I think about a lot of things," Jess said. She
censored
him again, feeling his hand on her lower back, traveling up under her shirt and scraping the skin. Tingles of excitement began to rise within her. "What sort of things does your naughty mind think about?" Dean asked, his hand moving to the front and undoing one button on her shirt. Jess smiled. God, he was turning her on. "Wouldn't you like to know?" "I definitely would," Dean said, his voice barely above a whisper oozing
censored
silky. "Well, you will have to use your imagination," Jess said as he undid a second and a third button. The cool air invaded her shirt, adding to the
censored
she was building. "I'm not that creative," Dean said. He finished off the last button and pushed open her shirt, revealing her large soft,
censored
held captive by a bra that was almost too small. "Would you like a demonstration then?" Jess said. Dean
censored
her again, moving his
censored
inside her mouth and caressing her. "I feel that would be best right now," Dean replied. As you wish, Jess said.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
I want to thank you for that amazing demonstration. I fully understand what you were talking about now, Dean said, still playing the game. Jess laughed. I'm glad. I have to say I learned a lot as well. Dean grabbed up his papers and headed for his office, giving her only a flirty glance backwards as he shuffled slowly down the hall. Jess had to laugh at the nonchalant manner he displayed after giving her a great
Censored
experience. She loved the off-handed nature of men. They were able to enter someone else's body and just borrow it for a bit without the slightest emotional attachment. Jess was glad of this, being a woman who basically did the same thing. It wasn't that she didn't want any emotional attachment to someone ever, but the right guy had not come along yet, and the right time was far from close. She went back to her desk and worked until midnight, enjoying the quiet of the world. Chapter 4. Alex Mathers sat across the desk from her. He had not spoken in almost 5 minutes. 3 of those minutes he had spent shuffling papers on his desk and catching up on some organization, but now he was just sipping his coffee and staring at her. His gaze was difficult to decipher, and she was not sure if he was glaring at her or not. Had she done something to upset him? Was it just the fact that she had not given him a definitive time for them to go out again? She was tempted to fold and stop playing the game she had set up, but it was so much damn fun that she wanted to see how it turned out. So, how have you been? Alex asked. He smiled slightly, but almost in a fake sort of manner. It was kind of funny, and Jess had to stifle her laughter. I've been good. The Jones case is coming along great. I think I'll get him a good deal. No chance of getting an acquittal on that one? Alex asked. No, there's just too much evidence. The guy's goose is a bit cooked. I figured as much. Well, you can't win them all. Was there something in particular you wanted to see me about, sir? Alex smiled for a moment. He had an odd look in his eyes now, as if he was thinking about telling her the truth, or that he was just going to toy with her a bit. I've noticed you and Dean have become close. Jess smiled, wondering how much he knew about her and Dean. Yes, we have become closer. Is that a problem? Well, no. I mean, the firm frowns on fraternizing between co-workers, especially between boss and associate, but then again I'd have to point the finger at myself if I enforce that rule. So what is the issue? Well, the issue is that I thought you and I had a great time the other night, and I would like to take you out again. I know. I would love to see you again, but I've just been so busy that I haven't had time. But you've had time for Dean? Jess stopped a moment, and wondered what kind of grade school whiny stunt he was pulling. Alex Mathers was not someone to care enough to get jealous, and he wasn't the type to get clingy or needy. But he loved to win. That was the thing. He was having trouble wondering why she so far had invested more time into the budding relationship, if you could even call it that, with Dean, but not with him. Well, it just worked out that way. Alex laughed. Well, I want you to come over to my place tonight. I know you have a lot of work to do, but I want you to come to my place tonight for dinner, Alex said. He held up his hand when she started to interject, and read her mind that she was going to say that she had work to do, which she did. Okay, I'll be there. She heard the arguing when she was leaving for the day. It was just after 5, and it felt weird for her to be leaving then. It almost felt like she was leaving in the middle of the day, which she knew was a strong sign that she definitely worked too much. She was just passing Dean's office, and she heard the loud voices inside. Jess paused and strained to listen. She recognized the 2 voices as Alex and Dean. They were in a heated discussion about something. She knew it was wrong, and she could probably get in trouble if anyone saw her eavesdropping on them, but before she could rationalize why she shouldn't do it, she was already there. I don't see what you are getting so upset about, Dean said. Oh, you don't? I asked her out first, Alex replied. What are you, 12? You are acting ridiculous. We have a pact between the two of us that we would never go after the same woman. We have tried this before to disastrous consequences. That was years ago. I thought you had grown up by now. Don't try to talk to me like I'm a child, Alex said. The sound of his voice was moving around as if he was pacing back and forth. Besides, it is clear that I'm winning the competition. I know that is tough for you to understand and handle, but it's true. Bullshit. I am just beginning to play, Alex responded. I love the way you degrade women. I wish Jess could hear you talk about her like she is a game. Jess smiled. She was hearing every word. Don't give me that, it's a game to you too. Not this time, Dean said. Oh, what? You expect me to believe that Dean Clark, Hugh Hefner of the law business, is ready to settle down? I'm not saying I want to settle down, but there is something different about Jess. She isn't just some random girl. She is smart, ambitious, and has a great future at this firm if you don't blow it. Me? What about you? What about me? Dean asked. Is it normal company policy to bang associates in the copy room after hours? Dean was silent for a moment. Oh, so that's what this is about? You are mad because I made love to her first. God, you have to get over yourself, Dean. I don't care about a game. You think I just want to play with this girl? I know how special Jess is. The truth is, I haven't felt this good around a woman in so long I can't remember. Really? I'm not sure I buy that. I know you too well, Alex. You are still the same playboy cat I knew in law school. Oh, I love the way you think you know me. Please continue to tell me how I feel, because I don't spend 24 hours a day inside my own head. Okay, so you have feelings for her. So do I. What do you want? Dean asked. I want you to back off. I saw her first. And we're back to this again, Dean replied. Look, neither one of us has dibs on her. She isn't an object. She has the right to decide who she wants. You are so slippery. That's what makes you such a good lawyer. You are the quintessential voice of reason, and you have everyone fooled who think you are just a nice, down-to-earth guy. I've seen the things you've done and the lives you've destroyed. I know who Dean Clark really is. I'm not denying that I've made some mistakes. I've offhandedly hurt people without considering the consequences of my actions. I've been reckless and impulsive, but so have you. I have changed. I've grown up a lot in recent years, and I don't know why you refuse to believe that. You refuse to believe it about me, too. Okay, well, I hope that you will prove me wrong, just as I am sure to prove you wrong. But that doesn't change what you are arguing about here. Jess is a grown woman, and if she decides either of us are privileged enough to be with her, then she will choose. You will have to wait for that to happen. We are both in the same boat. The only reason I didn't ask her out before was because of the pact we made. We both agreed that we wouldn't ask out co-workers anymore. But you broke the pact first. You asked her out. You asked her out, and you didn't know I had. So you had no problem with breaking the deal. I know, you are right about that. So we are just supposed to wait it out then? Alex asked. What else can we do? It is ultimately going to be her choice. Well, I have to go. I have a date this evening, Alex said. Jess quickly walked down the hall and turned the corner. As she walked away, she thought she heard Dean say, "Good luck." She smiled. It was flattering that the boys were fighting over her. She had never expected the game to go this far, and she felt like she should really come clean and tell them both that she wasn't looking for anything serious, but the truth was that she had felt close to both of them when she was hearing that conversation. She had not realized it until then, but both of them were exactly the type of man she had always dreamed of meeting. That was most likely why she had decided to not commit and play the game with both of them. It was easier than allowing either one into her heart. As she drove home, she could not shake the feeling that she was doing something wrong. After hearing the conversation, she was a mixed bag of emotions. On the one hand, it was exciting having these two amazing men fighting over her. But she also felt that she was getting in over her head, and one of them was probably going to be hurt when she was eventually forced to choose between them. But did she want to choose at all? It was not the right time in her career for her to get seriously involved with anybody, but life was unpredictable. That was something that she had learned long ago. The fact that she had overheard that verbal sparring match between Alex and Dean was definitely going to shadow her date with Alex that evening. She knew that it shouldn't matter, but it was going to be odd for her to try to ignore what she had heard. Dean and Alex knew each other better than she knew either of them, but she saw beyond the flashy alpha male behavior to what lay beneath the surface of both men. She could see right through the
censored
bravado that Alex displayed so openly, and she knew that deep down he was a good person. He would never let most people ever see that, because he was firmly convinced it was wrong to show weakness to anybody. Maybe she might be able to eventually get him to drop his guard, but it was unlikely. Dean, on the other hand, seemed like a warm and gentle guy, but Jess knew that no one got to be who he was by being warm and gentle. She had seen him turn on the tiger when enduring tough negotiations. So there was definitely more to him than meets the eye. Jess went inside her home and immediately got dressed. She was supposed to be at Alex's house in an hour. She should have left the office earlier, but she was a reverse procrastinator. She could not stop working on time ever. It was okay, because she had found herself at a comfortable stopping point in her work preparing for court the next day, and she had been in the right place and time to hear the little verbal exchange between Alex and Dean. It was almost like it was meant to be for her to hear that. She put on one of her newest and sexiest dresses. She wasn't planning on sleeping with Alex, but she wasn't planning on turning him down either. She had tasted the fruits of one, and now she wanted to taste the fruits of the other. She needed to see which one was sweeter. When she arrived at Alex's house, she was shocked by the size of the place. He was definitely living the rich bachelor lifestyle to the hilt. He had a huge yard, a big swimming pool with an ice sculpture of an electric guitar, and a mansion that made the houses on Celebrity Cribs look small in comparison. He greeted her at the door and escorted her through the humongous living room and into the large kitchen. He was just finishing up dinner, and she watched in amazement as he placed everything on the table in a very systematic manner. It was like watching a real-world chef serve you in a private setting. The fact that he had prepared the dinner and then set it up on the plate to look like something out of a five-star restaurant was so romantic. Her plate looked so beautiful that she didn't want to eat because it would mess it up. "I can't believe you did this," Jess said. Alex smiled. "I'm a man of many talents, my dear." "That you are? Where did you learn to do this?" "My aunt is a chef, and she took me under her wing when I was young and groomed me to be one too. I was all set up to go to culinary school when I decided to ditch it all and become a lawyer." "What happened?" "I just found that as much as I enjoy cooking, I didn't want to make a career out of it. So in college I was undecided the first year, but I was taking all my general education stuff to get it out of the way when I took my first political science class. This led me to take an interest in political science as a major. That in turn eventually led me to law school. It was kind of a natural path. Well, it is delicious. Although it's nice to know that if you ever get tired of fighting legal battles, then you have another path to turn to." "Yeah, I don't think that will ever happen. I don't know too many chefs who get to live the way I do. Plus, I love getting my hands dirty, and I love the challenge of law. With food, there is no challenge. You learn how to make things, and then you kind of run on autopilot the rest of the time. That wasn't for me." Crash. The window exploded behind them as an object hurled itself into the dining room. Jess jumped out of her chair and hit the floor on pure instinct, covering her head. Alex jumped up, ready for the attack. The object landed on the floor only a few feet from her. She kicked small shards of glass off herself. Jess winced as she turned her head away, fearing for her face. Alex was instantly beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Jess looked around. She heard nothing and saw nothing. "I think so. What the hell is going on?" Alex picked up the object from the floor and looked at it. It was a red brick. "It's okay. There is no one there now." Alex looked through the hole in the window. Jess rose to her feet slowly, not sure if everything was as okay as Alex seemed to think. He was hardly even rattled from the fact that a brick had just flown through the window. He was just staring at it intently, as if it was going to give up the identity of who had thrown it. "Any idea who would do this?" Jess asked. Alex was pensive for a moment. Finally he spoke. "I know who did it. And they are going to pay." Jess swallowed hard as Dean's face flashed in her mind. Couldn't be. Could it? End of Part 1. Part 2. Chapter 1. Jess Bilson finished the brief she was working on, and sat back in her comfortable office chair to have a mini celebration. She hated typing up legal briefs. It was by far the most tedious and time-consuming facet of being an attorney. She could have had a legal aid or paralegal do it, but truthfully most of them did not have the experience and expertise to do it properly. You would think that was something they were supposed to be taught while obtaining their degree, but it seemed that more and more of them developed amnesia when it came to this menial and boring chore. She was fairly certain that when their employer asked them to do a brief, most paralegals slopped it up so they would never be asked to do it again. Jess wasn't sure why the incompetents were not just fired and solid replacements put in their place. But then again, it had come to the point that so many of them had chucked this vital part of the job, that now it was almost impossible to find one that was able to turn in a solidly researched and well-written brief. She picked the document up from the printer and smiled with satisfaction. That was one of the best parts of the job, the feeling of accomplishment she got after she had done some exhausting chore she hated. Now she was prepared for the next day in court. Jess' mind was now free to think about other things, besides a Netflix binge and several cups of hot tea, like the rock that had crashed through Alex Mather's window on their date the other day. She could not get the fear out of her mind, and the loud crashing noise as the brick exploded through the window and sailed mere inches from her head. If it had hit her, she might have been killed. And she couldn't understand Alex's somewhat cavalier manner in dealing with the whole thing. How was it that nothing ever rattled the man? She could tell that he was very angry. He had that look in his eyes. His eyes were normally very sexy, and she could find herself lost in them for days at a time, but that night there had been a darkness in them, and a coldness in his face as he said he knew who threw the brick. Jess' first thought had been Dean. She was afraid she had started a bit of a rivalry between the two men, and while it was flattering that they were fighting over her, she really did not want to start a war between two alpha males. It was bad for the business they owned and had built together. She certainly never wanted to come between two friends. But she had to admit, a part of her found the whole thing exciting. It was very much the same sort of excitement that little girls dreamed about when they were planning their wedding to Prince Charming. That was the fantasy, to have several strong men fighting for your affections and waiting to see which one you would choose. She realized it was childish, and it was now starting to get out of hand. She needed to put a stop to it soon, but she was conflicted. She had no idea which man she wanted to pursue or even if she wanted to pursue anyone. She had done so well by just being by herself and focusing on her career for so long that it was tempting to tell them both that she wasn't interested. It sounded so easy. So why couldn't she bring herself to say it? Why couldn't she bring herself to make a decision on this? Jess had always been proud of her ability to quickly make a decision based on instinct, and to stand firmly behind it and accept the consequences, good or bad. She wasn't used to being indecisive. So why was she having this problem now? It was all starting to have an effect on her work and her sleep. She had never been one to sleep much, but now the sleep she was having was so interrupted that she found herself tossing and turning and waking up every 45 minutes to an hour. When she had to drag herself out of bed, it was a huge chore. She was used to bouncing up out of bed, ready to take on the world. She missed that version of herself. What if it wasn't Dean? That thought had also crossed her mind. She had wondered about that woman who had accosted her in the restroom at the restaurant on her first date with Alex. That woman was clearly out of her mind, and she could have thrown the brick or had someone throw the brick for her. Throwing a brick that hard and that far was not easy. It required someone with a certain amount of physical strength. The woman did not appear to be that powerful physically, but Jess had heard that the mad often possessed great strength. When the adrenaline was flowing, it was not impossible for 95-pound women to lift cars up off of their children. It was an idea that scared her to death. Did Alex really have that many enemies? Then there was Dean. There was so much about him she didn't know, but he seemed so much more down to earth than Alex. Was he really that sweet? Or did he have a dark side that he easily hid from view? Jess packed up her things and started to leave for the night. She had just passed Dean's office when he called out to her. She wondered if he wanted to have another in-office rendezvous. That was not happening tonight. She had given in because the idea excited her, but to do it here again was just a bit tacky, and Jess hated repeating herself. She had to do enough of that in court. She walked into his office to find him diligently at work, although most would not know it to look at him. He was sitting with his feet up on his desk, the computer's keyboard resting on his lap, drinking a glass of whiskey, and watching a news program on his flat-screen plasma TV that was mounted to the wall. It was almost as good as being home, she thought. "Hey Dean. How are you? I wanted to ask you that same thing. Alex told me about what happened the other night." "That's insane," Dean said. "Yeah. It ranks right up there on my list of most shocking things that have happened to me." "Do you believe Alex actually vaguely implied that I might be behind it?" Jess paused a moment, unsure of how to answer. She didn't want him to know that she'd had a lot of the same thoughts. "I swear I felt like decking the guy." "How crazy is that?" "It's pretty crazy," Jess said. "Well, I just wanted to make sure that he hadn't put weird ideas into your head. I know you are a lot more level-headed than he is, but I was just checking in with you. And I wanted to make sure that you weren't too traumatized by what happened." "I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me," Jess said. "That is great. So other than that, how have you been? How is the Jones case coming along?" "It's fine. I'm fine. I've been working hard on it, and I think it's going to turn out okay." Dean looked at her for a moment without saying anything, as if trying to size her up for something. "What are you doing this weekend?" he finally asked, refilling his whiskey glass. "Nothing much, probably just work." "You are so boring," Dean joked. "You have to get out more. We appreciate how hard you work, but you have to put living in there somewhere too." "Well, you can't have it both ways. Either you want me to rock out in court or you want me to have fun," Jess said. She realized that it had come out a bit snottier than she had intended. "Right you are," Dean said. She was unsure which he was referring to or which way he preferred her to go. "But this weekend, I was hoping you would accompany me to my cabin up north in Chesterville." "What?" Jess asked. He was asking her to go away with him for the weekend? This was all coming very fast, and she was almost offended at the gall that he had, but she was also a bit attracted to it. He had a way of making the ridiculous and absurd sound perfectly plausible. That was why he was so good. "Yeah. I want you to go away with me for a romantic weekend. They have a great ski lodge not far from my cabin up there, and I was intending on doing some skiing and maybe some snowboarding." "Do you ski? Or snowboard?" Jess swallowed hard. "Yes, I do ski. I haven't done any snowboarding though." "Well, it's no big thing, I'll teach you." "I'm sure you will, but I don't think I can blow off work to run away with you for the weekend." "You can bring your work with you, I will as well. That way we can both work and play. It's kind of my mantra. Jess smiled. The guy was so slick. It was almost impossible to say no to him. It had been forever since she had been away anywhere for a weekend. And the thought of hitting the slopes again sounded like a blast. She used to go skiing all the time with friends from her sorority when she was in college. Okay. I'll go. Dean smiled and gave himself a chuckle. Great. I can't wait. I'll see you tomorrow, Dean. Good night, sexy. Jess tried to hide the excitement in her walk as she stepped out of Dean's office and walked down the hall. The more she thought about it, the more amazing it sounded. It was all very romantic and sweet. She planned to get some work done, but she planned to get more play done than work. That meant she had to pull a couple of all-nighters over the next few days, which wouldn't be too hard. She was totally used to that. There were some things in life worth making sacrifices for. Chapter 2. Jess was in shock at the size of the cabin that Dean owned in Chesterville. It was actually a 2-story log cabin-type house, which he'd obviously had custom-made. It had 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a huge kitchen and large dining room, complete with a long table that was capable of seating 12, a sauna, a billiard room with a beautiful pool table, a dartboard and a poker table. And Jess' favorite, a big jacuzzi on an enclosed deck outside. After Dean gave her the nice tour, they decided to waste no time in hitting the slopes. Jess had not skied in a few years, but she heard it was very much like riding a bike, where you never really forgot how. She doubted this was completely true. She had not ridden a bike since she was 10, and if she got on one now, she would no doubt get hurt and have to relearn everything all over again. But she was no coward, and she was ready to get out there and rock out. Plus, she didn't want to look like a geek in front of Dean. God, it's great to be back out here, Dean said as he prepared to get set up for his first launch. Jess had to agree. The crisp air and the snow beneath her feet felt very familiar. The air tasted and breathed so much easier than the city air she was used to, and it felt so refreshing to be out among nature and to get back in touch with human roots. You want to go first? Dean asked. No, I'll let you. I don't want to get in your way, Jess said. No problem, Dean replied. He started his ascent down the mountain. Jess was impressed at the masterful way that he held his skis under control, letting the momentum take him where he needed to go, and moving his body just ever so slightly along with it. She found herself laughing at the rush that had to be going through Dean's body right now. She wanted to go so badly, but she was a bit terrified. Would her body remember how to do everything? Would she crash into a tree? She guessed there was only one way to find out. She pushed off and began to move downhill. Her skis found the snow and began to cut through it and pick up momentum. Within seconds her body found the groove, and everything came flooding back to her. The cold air whipped against her face, but not in a punishing way. It was very sweet actually, like the cold lips that belonged to a good friend, but warmed as they brushed the skin. Her heart was beating fast in her,
Censored.
increasing with the increase in speed. She thought about slowing down, but the rush was too great and she found herself wishing that she could go faster. She pushed harder, even though it was against her better judgment. She could see Dean waiting for her at the bottom, having just finished his run. He was clapping and cheering her on. She was laughing so hard from the giddy feelings rushing through her body that it was affecting her stability slightly. She tried to calm down a little bit, but to no avail. She just wanted to ski. She finished the run and came to a stop without stumbling or falling over. She considered that to be a huge accomplishment. Dean rushed to her and wrapped her in his arms. Way to go, Dean said. Wow. That felt so great. I can't believe I've stayed away from it for so long, Jess said. That's what being a workaholic does to you, Dean said. You have to take a few minutes out to enjoy life sometimes. Jess was starting to agree with him. She wondered about all of the other things that she was missing out on. As they walked over to get on the lift, Dean grabbed her hand in his. Even through the ski gloves it was nice, even if it was a bit weird. But that was Dean. He was not afraid to do awkward or insane things to have fun. She loved that about him. They sat down on the lift and enjoyed the ride back up the mountain. Jess had forgotten what this view was like and how it felt to ride so high up above everything. It really put the scope of the world into focus. The world was so beautiful, and Jess was so glad she had accepted Dean's invitation. They hopped off the lift, and once again Jess was impressed with her own ability to stay on her feet. And then she prepared for another run. This time, they decided they were going to go together. It would be more fun that way. Jess was determined to beat Dean down the mountain. He was going to eat her dust. And maybe later he will eat something else of mine, she thought. She was surprised at how extreme and exhilarating things always turned her on. It was weird, but she was happy to embrace her weirdness sometimes. "Hey, you got room for one more?" Jess couldn't believe it. Alex Mathers came up behind them right then. She had to do a double take. It was so surreal that he was there right then and there. "What the hell are you doing here?" Dean asked through gritted teeth. "Good to see you too, buddy," Alex said. Dean, realizing that he had allowed his anger to shine through, turned on a charming smile and tried to recant. "This is a hell of a surprise, man." "I know, right?" Jess wanted to hug him, but she did her best to restrain herself from mauling the man. She looked between him and Dean. It was so odd that both of them were here right now, and she wondered how this was going to go down. She was Dean's date for the weekend. Had Alex come up here to interfere? Did he just want to spy on them and make himself an awkward third wheel? "You just happened to be in the neighborhood?" Jess asked. Alex laughed. "No, I heard you guys were coming up here and it sounded like a great plan. I haven't been up here for a few months. It's been too long. I was starting to go a little stir-crazy back home." "You just came up here by yourself on a whim?" Dean asked, trying to hide his condescending manner. Jess noticed he wasn't doing a good job of that. She had to laugh at it. "No, I brought a date. She was right behind me," Alex said. "You lost her already? Guess you need a tighter leash," Dean said. "Now boys, play nice," Jess said, goading the situation. She knew it was wrong to pour gas on an open flame, but she was finding the whole thing hard to resist. It was so hot, having two sexy men fighting over her. She wanted to see this date of Alex's. It was cute how he was trying to make her jealous and ruin her date with Dean all at the same time. It was like something she would see on a soap opera, only with better dialogue. "I may have," Alex replied. A few seconds later, a woman appeared in the distance behind him, moving across the snow. She was pretty, and Jess immediately felt a twinge of jealousy as the woman grabbed hold of Alex's waist and leaned in close to him. Chelsea had long blonde hair and curves for days. She reminded Jess of a younger and sexier version of Pam Anderson. Even in a ski suit, the woman looked stunning. Jess instantly hated her, and it made her intensely angry to see the woman pawing at Alex that way. She wanted to rip the cow's hair out, but she held it together. If Alex wanted to play that way, then that was fine with her. Alex introduced Chelsea to Dean and Jess. Jess did her best polite, "Nice to meet you" smile, and Chelsea did the same. Both women secretly glared at each other. The animosity was not hard to feel, but Jess wondered why Chelsea felt animosity towards her. It was unlikely that Alex had told Chelsea that he was also dating Jess. Was it just something the other woman felt intuitively? Jess herself had always had that ability, but she had not known it to be a common thing for all women to have. Chelsea was probably just a typical stuck-up princess who secretly hated all women and was intimidated by any attractive woman being near her man. Jess was used to the syndrome. If the cow so much as looked at her cross-eyed, she was going to take her down a peg. But if she did that, she would be playing right into Alex's game. He wanted to make her jealous and make her realize that she could easily lose him, or worse yet, that she did not have any real designs on him to begin with. That wasn't news to Jess. She and Alex had not made any commitments to each other. "Well, let's get this party started," Alex said. "Ready when you are," Dean replied. "I agree," Jess chimed in. Chelsea didn't say anything, but she got her game face on anyway. They all got settled in, and then without a hitch they were off, racing down the mountain. Jess found that the second run was even easier for her than the first. She wasn't sure if it was just practice and everything coming back to her, or if it was the thrill of the competition. Dean and Alex were off to a strong start in front of Jess and Chelsea. Jess expected this, and she wasn't even trying to race either one of them, but she wanted to beat Chelsea. There was an unspoken feud between them. Even though a simple ski race meant nothing in the long run, it was somehow becoming a symbol in Jess' mind. Alex and Dean both wanted to be with the winner, and if she didn't win this ski race, then she was going to lose points in both of their eyes. She knew it somehow, although the whole thing sounded ridiculous. This ski race really had nothing to do with her as a romantic partner, but Jess hated to lose at anything, and if she lost this race, it was going to affect her confidence in other areas of her life. She realized this was an obsessive and unhealthy attitude, but she had always been that way. She wanted to win and win at any cost, no matter what undertaking she decided to partake in. It was on. Chelsea was neck and neck with her at first, but then Jess easily pulled ahead of her. Jess shouted in victory as she passed Chelsea and left her far behind her, but Jess didn't even think about slowing up or resting on her laurels. That was how you got beat in the end. You could never take your opponent lightly. Jess could now see that Alex and Dean were neck and neck, and neither one seemed to be in any danger of falling behind. They were pushing as hard as they could, both of them flying at breakneck speed. If one of them messed up just a little bit, they could end up flying into a tree, or at least wiping out and breaking some bones rolling down the hill. Jess tried to gain speed so she could see better, but they were both just too fast. They were strong, athletic men, and both were advanced skiers. It was impossible for her to even hope to catch either one of them, but she was going to try. At least it would give her something else to push for, to make sure she stayed far ahead of Chelsea. She was tempted to look back to see where Chelsea was. She was pretty sure the girl had fallen off the planet, but she didn't dare trust her skill level enough to glance backwards. She could just see that ending horrifically bad. They were almost at the end of the run when Jess saw it happen. Dean stuck his pole out a little bit, just enough to trip Alex's right ski. Alex immediately went down, as he tried to correct himself. He tumbled the rest of the way down the run, but luckily it was almost to the flat at the bottom when he fell, and he landed on snow the whole way. There were no trees or jagged rocks in his path. If there had been, he would have been in so much trouble. Had Jess really seen that? Did Dean really trip his friend and business partner so that he would lose a ski race? She still wasn't sure she had witnessed that taking place. It was like waking from a strange dream, where you didn't know if you were awake or asleep. It was possible that it was an accident, and even possible that it only looked like Dean tripped him. It might have just been close. His pole might have just moved a bit too far away from his body. They were too far away to tell what had actually happened. Jess came to a stop as Alex was standing to his feet. "Alex, are you all right?" "Oh, I'm just fine. I'm going to kill that bastard," he said. Dean rode up beside them and came to a quick stop. He seemed genuinely shaken up. "Alex? Dude, are you okay?" "I have no idea how that happened," Dean said. Jess actually found herself believing him. "What? Are you going to try to say you didn't just trip me on purpose?" Alex was getting up in Dean's face. "Man, I don't know what you are talking about. You think I would do that?" "I know you would. I've seen you do worse," Alex replied. "What in the hell is that supposed to mean?" Dean asked. "What do you think? Do I need to come right out and say it?" "I was being coy about it," Alex said as he turned away and began skiing towards the lifts. Dean was glaring at him with an intensity that Jess had never seen in him before. It was kind of a sexy, smoldering look, but it was also scary as hell if you were the one he was focusing his stare on. Jess actually felt for a moment like Dean might actually go after Alex, or at least he was plotting something for later. She wondered what sort of animosity had been brewing between the two men for a while. This couldn't all be because of her, as flattering as the thought may have been. What was Alex talking about? What had Dean done? She was beyond curious now, and she desperately wanted to ask, but knew he might bite her head off if she did. There were certain things that you just didn't push with guys. Buried secrets between bros were pretty high on the list. She had figured that one out long ago. Chelsea moved in line behind Alex, following him. Jess had not even noticed she had finished her run, and was standing quietly a few feet from them. Jess stared at Chelsea's impressively athletic and lean body. She sometimes wished she had a body like hers. She would be an even greater athlete than she was now. She wondered how she had beaten Chelsea. It had to be all a matter of skill, because Jess was a good 40 pounds heavier than Chelsea, and probably not much stronger. It made the win that much more satisfying. "We gonna go for another run?" Jess asked. She was hoping they would do a few more, but now she wasn't so sure that Alex was in the mood. He had very nearly gotten hurt a few minutes ago, and even though he wouldn't show it or admit it, he was probably still a bit sore and shaken up. "Sure, let's do it." Dean was instantly cheerful again, and acting as if nothing had happened at all. He had that look of a champion back in his eye, and he was ready to roll. He moved off towards the lift. Jess paused a moment just staring at him. Who was he? How was he able to just change his whole mood and attitude that way? That was probably why he had such a great poker face. In his line of work, you couldn't compete if you got rattled easily. You had to have nerves of steel. Jess liked to think she had nerves of steel, but she knew that hers paled in comparison to Dean or Alex. The men were both superhuman. The way they were able to compartmentalize their emotions was staggering. She envied that. It was a rare talent. The next run turned out to be the last one of the day for them, but it was nonetheless fun. It actually was the most fun run of all, because it seemed that Dean and Alex both simmered down and just enjoyed themselves without getting all psycho alpha male and going crazy. Jess was even finding that she tolerated Chelsea for a bit, but she still hated the girl. She was the poster girl for all of the things that Jess was against as a woman. She was superficial, shallow, and lazy. She was a princess, and she expected everyone to treat her that way because her rich daddy had. Jess hated those types of women because she knew they never appreciated anything, and they expected everything. That night at the cabin, Dean was rather quiet. As they sat on his couch watching some old John Hughes DVDs from the 80s, he didn't utter a word. Occasionally he would grunt a laugh when something silly happened, but he was content to be quiet. He just sat and sipped his bourbon. Jess was absolutely beat. She had forgotten how much skiing took out of you, and she was in very bad shape compared to the shape she used to be. "I've got to start working out," she thought. She was starting to get a bit bored, so she decided to see if she could draw Dean out of his shell. He looked like he really did not want to be bothered, but she didn't care. Sometimes it was fun to just push people, to see how far you could get away with pushing them. It often ended badly, but it also sometimes ended splendidly. She was hoping it would end in the bedroom. For some reason she was really hot tonight, and Dean was looking extra delicious. It might have been the way he was being all standoffish and aloof. She had always been attracted to the strong, silent type. There was something about a man who was stoic and spent a lot of time inside their own minds, as if separating themselves from the rest of the world. "So what's on your mind?" Jess asked. Dean looked somewhat annoyed for a split second, but quickly popped a huge smile across his face as he looked over at her, flashing those sexy eyes at her. That was such a huge turn-on, but she held her poker face. She had to make sure that he didn't catch on to the game yet. She had to make him squirm a little bit. "Nothing much. Just enjoying the flick." "Have you seen it before?" Dean asked. "I'm not sure. Which one is it?" "Ferris Bueller's Day Off." "It's a classic," Dean said. He was genuinely in love with the movie. Jess had only half watched it, so she had no idea if it was funny or not. "Oh, I may have seen it before. It sounds familiar. I tell you, they do not make flicks like this anymore. Really? You a big teen movie fan? No, just this era. The 80s movies had so much pizzazz and fun. They were all about never growing up and avoiding responsibility. But at the end of the movie, the kid always learned about responsibility anyway. It seems that no matter how hard you try to push it away, growing up happens whether you want it to or not. Jess was taken aback. She had no idea that Dean could be that deep and introspective. She now had a whole new appreciation of him, and of these goofy teenage movies he seemed to love. There was something so sexy about a man who was passionate and brainy about something that she cared nothing for, because he had just made her care about it too. She wanted to watch these films for herself and see what she would take from it. Wow, that is very interesting. I have never seen these movies in that light. How did you get into this particular era? I'm not sure. I guess they used to play these movies on spring break and winter break on television when I was a kid, and these ones were the movies that just hooked me. They taught me a lot about life and how to make sure I never ended up like the geek who couldn't get the girl, Dean said with a wink that made Jess blush. So, we aren't getting much work done this weekend, are we? Jess asked. Dean laughed. No, I guess not. But screw it. We get paid no matter if we win or not. For a while that might be true, until we end up with no clients because no one wants to go to jail so they never hire us, she thought. How do you have such a cavalier attitude about life? Jess asked. She had moved slowly closer to him, inch by inch. She wasn't sure he had actually seen it, but she was going to be right next to him on the couch in just a few seconds. He was still too preoccupied by the movie. I just don't allow myself to get too emotionally involved in things. Getting bent out of shape never helped anybody. Like today, I was just about to break Alex's neck, but then I stopped myself. It wasn't worth it. So you don't really think he tripped you on purpose? Oh, that
Censored.
Totally did it on purpose. I'm just saying I'm prepared to wait until the perfect time to strike to get him back. That sounds dangerous, Jess said. She was practically whispering in his ear now. It's not. I can totally. Dean stopped short, as he suddenly realized that Jessica was putting a move on him. He looked her deeply in the eyes, and his eyes widened with
Censored.
For a few seconds, neither one of them moved. No one blinked and no one breathed. They were just getting lost in the look. It was here and now. They were here together, and they were sharing a moment. Dean grabbed her and pulled her close, pressing his lips to hers hard. Jess smiled inwardly. This was turning out to be a great weekend. Chapter 3. Jessica was awakened by her phone vibrating. She rolled her head slowly to the side, pretty sure that she was dreaming. It took a few moments and another round of buzzing for her to come to the conclusion that she was not dreaming and she had just received a text message. In the dark, she could read that it was from Alex. She picked up her phone, noticed that it was 3:30 in the morning. What in the hell could he possibly want at this hour? She debated ignoring it and thought about just drifting back off to sleep. She darted her eyes to the left, making sure that Dean hadn't heard the phone. He was dead asleep. She decided to ignore it. Whatever Alex had to say to her, he could say in the morning. Now was the time for sleeping. She had been dreaming about something amazing, but she could not remember what. She hated when that happened. It was something that was going to bug her the rest of the day, and she silently cursed Alex. Hopefully her subconscious would remember it, and she could get back to sleep easily. A few minutes later, she was on the verge of drifting back to sleep when the phone vibrated again. It somehow seemed to be louder this time. She couldn't believe it. The man would not take no for an answer. She used to find that sexy, but now she was finding it totally annoying. She slipped out of the covers and grabbed her phone. She clicked on the first message. Hey, meet me outside the cabin. I want to talk. That is a very vague message, she thought. Why would she even take that bait? Come on, Alex. You are going to have to do better than that. She clicked on the second message. Come on, don't be a chicken shit. Jess glared angrily in the dark. How did he know how to push her buttons? How did he know that being called that was the worst thing in the world for her? She tried not to give in. It was late, and she was exhausted. She had actually thought about going into the other room to get some work done. She always worked much more efficiently when she was tired. She was not sure why. Maybe it was because her brain was moving at a slower pace, and she could actually concentrate better. She had read an article once about the effects of limited sleep on overachievers, and she believed one of the studies had proven that theory on its test subjects. She wondered why they had never contacted her. She would have been great for a study like that. It was going to eat at her if she didn't go. Being called chicken shit or anything close to it had always had the same effect on her as telling her that she couldn't do something, or that she couldn't be something. Jess had always been the type of person who could not stand being told what to do, or being told that she was inferior in some way. She had gotten better with it, and at times she thought she had even cured it, but then some idiot would say something to her, and it would send her over the edge a bit. She hated to be treated that way, and could not stand the idea of someone looking down on her. She knew that Alex was just teasing, and he was trying to aggravate her. Well, it's freaking working. She knew as soon as she had read the words that she was going to be going out there tonight. It was stupid, and he was probably going to try to get her.
Censored.
Or do some other weird shenanigans. On second thought, he was a grown man. She had dated far too many insecure little boys in her time who needed to grow up. Alex was many things, and most of those things were shadowed in a negative light, but he was a strong, dominant man who was in charge of his own life. That was one of the things she found most intriguing about him. She had really been giving him an extra hard time of things, and she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because Alex was the quintessential bad boy, and she had vowed never to get seriously involved with one of those. This was precisely the reason that she had pulled herself back from him, she realized. She liked Alex way more than she liked to admit, and that scared her. She was as afraid of him as she was turned on and drawn to him. It was a weird bad boy sickness, and most women alive today had dealt with it, and they either moved on or matured out of it, or they clung to it, convinced that they were right in assuming that these men could change. But they could only change a little bit. If they changed too much, then they were no longer exciting and bad. There was no excitement, mystery, or danger. Some women thrived on it. Jess knew she was one of those women, but she had refrained from allowing herself to become too involved with that kind of man. She knew that if a man like that ever sank his teeth into her, then she would be his forever, and it would be hopeless. She would fall madly in love, and then her heart would eventually become shattered into a million pieces, never to be repaired again. Jess took a deep breath, got out of bed, put on a pair of sweats and a hoodie. 5 minutes later, she was standing outside of the cabin looking for Alex. She saw no one. The anger began to rise inside of her, and she felt like screaming. Had he just sent her this text so that she would go outside for no reason? It was freezing out, and she wasn't dressed that warmly. She didn't think she would be out there that long. And she was right. Alex was nowhere in sight, so she was going back inside. Hey, looking for me? Jess stopped mid-step and spun around. Alex's grinning face was standing there. He had been hiding behind a tree, and now he stepped out into full view, his face lit up by the huge bright full moon that hung low in the clear sky. He was clearly enjoying himself and his little trick on her. She was filled with the sudden urge to ram his face into a tree. But the way he was laughing was beginning to make her laugh. She held onto her straight face by sheer force of will. "What are you doing?" Jess asked. "I was out for a walk and I got bored. So I came up here." "You walked all the way up here?" "It's not that far. I'm at the resort about 2 miles down the road." "It's a pretty nice walk actually," Alex said. "You take a lot of midnight strolls?" "I do when I'm this close to the beauty of nature," Alex replied seriously. Jess was trying desperately to figure this man out, and just when she thought she had him, he threw her another curve. It was exhausting, but also very exciting. Oh no, those are two of the symptoms, she thought. Okay, I'm here. What was so important that you had to drag me out of bed at 4 in the morning? I needed to talk to you. I need to talk to you about Dean. What about Dean? Alex walked closer to her, his feet shuffling the snowy asphalt beneath. Dean is dangerous, Alex said. Jess laughed. What do you mean dangerous? He is your best friend. Yeah, he is. I know him better than just about anybody. Trust me when I tell you the man is dangerous. Dangerous how? A few years ago, he got a girl pregnant. She was one of our interns. The girl tried to blackmail him into marrying her. Her grandpa is Judge Williams. If you know anything about Judge Williams, then you know that you never want to.
Censored.
This guy off. Okay. I'm listening. Well, Dean wasn't sure what to do. He was really in a bind. If he didn't marry her, then she was going to make him pay out the ass for child support for years to come. Based on his earnings and some extra doctoring from the judge with the court documents, the man was looking at paying a king's ransom for a kid with a woman that he barely knew. Wow. So what happened? That's where it gets weird. Dean decides to marry the girl, and a few weeks before the wedding, the girl is driving home from work when she loses control of the car and rolls it over a big hill. She was found dead at the scene. Wow, that's awful. Did he ever recover from it? Alex laughed. You don't understand. The girl meant less than nothing to him. He had been forced into marrying a woman he hated, and suddenly in a flash, all of his problems are solved. No way. You aren't suggesting that he actually did something to make her crash, so he wouldn't have to marry her. That is what the cards are showing. Did the cops ever look suspiciously at him? Jess asked. No, of course not. It was a pretty clean textbook case. So you have no way of knowing he did that? Alex smiled. It looked wicked in the moonlight. Did you know that Dean's dad was a mechanic? Jess shook her head no. Did you know that Dean worked there part-time until he was in high school? The man knows how to mess with an automobile. His dad used to do it all the time. You know, a customer comes in who knows
Censored.
about cars and needs a repair. He cuts them a deal and fixes it, but then he tampers with something else that is a lot more expensive, so they have to come right back for that. That's messed up. You really think he did that? I don't have any irrefutable proof, and neither did the cops, but there are far too many coincidences there to ignore for my comfort. Jess thought a moment about what Alex had said. Was that what they were talking about before? Was it possible? Could Dean actually have gotten away with murder? Maybe more than once? If it was true, then who was to say that he wouldn't do it again if the opportunity presented itself to him? But it all could be a coincidence. There was no proof, and why would she believe Alex about any of this? He saw Dean as competition where she was concerned, and he wasn't past saying anything to tarnish Dean's good name, to put him in better graces with her. So where is Chelsea? Oh God. I had to get away from that girl. She has a body that will melt your mind, but she has a brain that will fill it with air. Jess laughed. So your weekend is a bust? Jess asked. Well, not totally. I still get to spend time with you. Yeah, but I'm here with Dean. Well, actually you are here with me, Alex replied. Jess smiled. She was now aware that Alex had closed the gap, and he was invading her personal space. What was weirder is that she seemed to have no problem letting him. She did not know what it was about this man that had such a huge allure over her, but she wanted to touch him, almost like a driving need. It was weird because between him and Dean, she was being pulled equally hard in two directions. She knew that she had to pick one of these guys. She understood now as Alex pressed his mouth against hers and began to pull her close to him. As she wrapped her arms around his thick neck and enjoyed his lips massaging hers, that she needed to make a decision. She could not have it both ways here. This feud of theirs was getting out of hand, and she was the cause of it. They were best friends and business partners who had built a hugely thriving business that was in jeopardy of being dismantled with some stupid jealousy and lies. As she enjoyed Alex's lips on hers, she realized that she had made a decision. She was going to tell them both who she was going to pick on Monday. It had to end. It had to end. Chapter 4. You've probably wondered why I've called this meeting with you both this morning, Jess said. Alex and Dean sat across from her in the large conference room. With just the three of them sitting at the table, the room looked awkwardly humongous and out of place. Jess found it very distracting, but she tried to remain focused. This had to be done. Sure, Alex said. Dean remained silent, but the look on his face told Jess that he knew what this was about. I really like both of you guys, and I know that I've made things difficult by dating you both. Difficult isn't the word I would use, Dean said. What word would you use? Alex asked. Exciting. Exciting? Jess asked. What was he, high? What are you high? Alex asked. Dean smiled at him. Well, anyway, I have asked you both here because I have made a decision. Drumroll please, Alex said. I have decided to choose Alex. Dean didn't move. He didn't speak for several seconds. Neither did Alex. It was as if they both expected that she would either choose the other one, or that she would never really choose at all. Jess wasn't sure if she should say anything else or wait for one of them to speak, but the silence was awkward and deafening. Alex cleared his throat before he finally spoke. I have to admit that I feel a bit odd waiting on a woman to say she chooses me, but I have to say that I am flattered as well, Alex said. Jess wasn't sure if she should be offended or if she should just be relieved that it was all over. The back and forth of everything was just turning out to be too much for her to take, and she had found it was even starting to affect her work. She'd had to pull several all-nighters as of late, and foregone sleep entirely on those nights just to maintain where she needed to be with her work. But she found this made her a bit dopey in court, and that was not fair for her clients. Dean snorted just then, as if he was mock-laughing at the whole thing. He was obviously
censored,
and Jess was a bit put off by his somewhat immature handling of the situation. Dean was a man who was not used to not getting his way and not getting what he wanted. Jess had the feeling that he had not heard the word no very often in life, especially when it came to women. It was reinforcing for her that she had made the right decision. This is somewhat humiliating, but I'll have to accept it. Not to mention how tacky it is that you called a meeting to discuss this. You could have sent a simple text or email. Dean began to stand up to leave the room. Dean, don't be a sore loser, Alex rubbed it in. Jess thought for a moment that Dean was going to turn and slug Alex, knocking him off the chair. Dean smiled and flipped him the bird as he slammed the door. Well, he took that really well, Alex said as he stood up and walked to the other side of the table. He
censored
Jess sweetly on the lips. She felt like she was about 2 inches big right then. She hated hurting Dean's feelings. She knew that he would never admit to having feelings, let alone feelings that could actually be hurt, but she could see in his eyes that his heart had been broken just then. Was he actually in love with her? Was Alex? She felt that it was far too soon to feel that way about either man, but part of that had been because she had closed off her heart to the idea of it. She had decided for herself that she would not allow her feelings to become a factor, and that was why she had allowed her stupid little game to go on for as long as it had. She had really been playing herself the whole time. Now it was different. She had decided that she was not going to let her heart become a piece of stone anymore. She was tired of planning out every little detail of her life. There was no passion to anything when you did that. It was like everything became emotionless and void of any sort of joy. She could not live like that anymore. He will be okay. He's a big boy, Alex said. I know, but you have to wonder what he is going to do now, Jess said. I'm not so sure he will do anything other than get raging drunk and boink about 20 college girls from that crowbar place where they all hang out. Really? He goes there? He doesn't stick out like a sore thumb? Apparently not. I guess he still has the cool factor left over from his law school days. He used to go there all the time, but then he chilled a bit with it. Now he may start back again. Or he might find some other place entirely. Well, good luck to him. Alex pulled her close in his arms. He felt strong and warmly inviting wrapped around her. So why did you pick me? Alex asked. I'm not exactly sure, but it just felt right. Sometimes you have to follow your heart. Jess was feeling pretty good when she drove up to her house. The day of work had flown by, and it had ended up being a pretty productive day in court. She was actually starting to think that she might get Dr. Jones' sentence reduced from 15 years to 5 by having him take a full psych evaluation that would declare him to be a pervert essentially, and that he was incapable of helping himself. He had a problem and a need that screamed out for him to satisfy it. He was a
censored
addict. She was pretty sure that at least one of those things was true, and it was going to become apparent in court. The man had issues, there was no doubt about it. Jess was looking forward to just relaxing and enjoying a nice evening of quiet television and a few glasses of wine. She and Alex had made plans to go out the following night. He was going to take her to some new fancy restaurant he had heard about that was supposed to be all the rage. Jess was never up on any of these types of things. She just didn't pay attention to where all of the cool kids hung out these days. But Alex seemed really excited about it. After dinner, he was taking her to the opera, which she had never really been to before. It sounded boring and weird, but she was willing to give it a shot. She walked into her quiet, dark house, instantly poured herself some wine, and sat down on the couch without even bothering to remove her work clothes. Somewhere between leaving her office and the 20-minute drive home, the exhaustion had set in. Even though the day had been good, the overall week had been brutally stressful. She sipped her wine slowly, enjoying the flavors swirling around in her mouth, and then swallowed it. She felt like she needed a vacation. A real vacation without any drama or anybody. In fact, thinking of it right then, she decided that the perfect vacation for her would be to coop herself up inside her house for a month and never step foot outside. If she didn't have to see or talk to anybody for a while, that would be just fine with her. That included Alex, even though she really liked him. It was just one of those times that she just wanted to be alone. It would pass. She knew herself too well. If she were away from people, and away from her job for more than a few days, she would be tearing her hair out by the roots. She was in the middle of her 3rd episode of Breaking Bad when the email came into her phone. She thought about ignoring it because something really intense was about to happen with the show. She had never watched that show when it had aired originally, but she had heard so much hype about it on Facebook and at work that she decided she just had to check it out. Her phone buzzed again as she continued to ignore it. She was tired of people having so much access to her, and she was tired of feeling chained to the world by a piece of electronics. She had wanted to throw her iPhone against the wall so many times. Jess had actually stopped herself a few times while in the middle of the act. The anger issues were something that she was working on. She wondered how Alex might react to the first time she lost her shit and weirded out on him. Well, if he really loved her, he would find it endearing and give her a sweet
censored
to let her know that everything was okay. She smiled at the thought. Her phone buzzed again. It seemed that she was popular all of a sudden, and she was already wishing she could take back every wish she had ever made to any magic genie she had ever seen. Jess grabbed her phone after putting Breaking Bad on hold. She finished off her glass of wine, enjoying the buzz begin to kick in, and checked her email on her phone. She noticed she had 3 messages from the same sender, but she didn't recognize the name. At first, she just imagined it was some scammer looking to trick her into giving out her credit card number or trying to hack her email. Or it could be a virus or some other piece of malware that was trying to accomplish all of the same things. She figured it was probably nothing and opened it up anyway. It was a message that said, "Stay away from him, cow." Jess felt her heart skip a beat as she leapt up off of her couch. She suddenly felt very much alone and very much afraid. Jess was not the type of girl who felt fear that often. She was always in control, and she had a firm idea of who she wanted to be in the world, and nothing would ever stand in the way of that. She had decided that a long time ago. But she was very afraid now. She had dropped her phone on the floor when she leapt up, almost knocking over the bottle of wine that had about one glass left in it. She began racking her brain for possible subjects of whom could have sent this email to her. Who had access to her email address? Who knew about her and Alex? Was it Dean? She figured that he might not take this type of humiliation lying down. She didn't share Alex's cavalier attitude about the whole thing. She was a bit more cautious, and now it was turning out that she had been right. Dean was going to demand that they not be together. It had to be him, right? Unless, it might have been that woman from the bar that night when she had first gone out with Alex. Who's to say she was going to give up so easily? Or it might have even been any number of scorned lovers that Alex Mathers was hiding in his past. What had she gotten herself into? She poured the last bit of wine and drank it down swiftly. She picked up her phone and dialed Alex. It rang several times before going to his voicemail. She dialed him again, and the voicemail picked up again. Damn. Where was he? She was starting to feel like the type of woman she had always swore she wouldn't be. She wasn't about to start defining herself by a man, and she wasn't going to get clingy or weird and demand to know where he was every second. That was not going to happen. She was going to remain the strong and independent woman she had always been. But right now she really wished she could hear his voice. She needed to talk to him about this. She was not a nervous person, but she had a strong feeling that all of this was going to end up going south in some way. Her breathing was coming in short gasps as the tears streamed down her face. Was this message only the beginning? She was going to be damned if she gave in and left Alex alone. The more she thought about their relationship, and she had been thinking about it often, the more she realized how much she was actually falling for Alex. She saw the way he looked at her, and knew that the feeling was well reciprocated, and every time she looked into his eyes, she felt like she was on top of the world. There was no way in hell she was going to be intimidated by a faceless voice. But she needed to talk to Alex. They needed to find out what they were dealing with before things got worse. End of Part 2. Part 3. Chapter 1. Jessica Bilson felt her sides begin to split in two pieces. Her body was trying to force her to double over in pain, while her lungs gasped for just 1 ounce of sweet air, but she was denied this luxury. Her head began to spin, and she truly felt dizzy on a scale that she had never known before. Her head pounded down the back of her skull, rocking from the base of her neck to the very top of her cranium, pinging out like laser beams to her temples. She felt nausea rocking through her stomach, turning to sharp pains as it reached her.
Censored.
And dissipated to a dull.
Censored.
In her jaw. Still she would not let up. Her feet pounded the pavement harder, as she pushed her legs further. The morning sunrise was just coming up over the horizon, and she was trying to fixate on that, to take her mind away from the sheer misery that she was putting her body through. This was the 3rd day of her new fitness regime that she had committed to, and she hated every single second of it still, but she had to admit that she was starting to find parts of it exhilarating, addictive even. It was a weird thing to explain. How had she become addicted to something she loathed? Maybe it was the way she felt afterwards. It was like her body finally felt truly awake. She had found her mind was sharper, and her energy levels were through the roof. She slept better, and she found her body craving healthier foods. The sight and smell of greasy and disgusting fake foods were no longer nearly as appetizing as they had been. She found herself craving the crunch of leafy greens and the natural sweetness of fresh fruit over the refined carbohydrates that had been her staple diet for so many years. She knew that the workouts would get easier, even though right now she was so sore she could hardly stand it. While her energy levels were great, her muscle
censored
were still nonstop. They were rebelling against her and the newfound workout she was putting them through. The idea to start working out had come after she had seen that message warning her to stay away from Alex. Jess wasn't sure why that was the catalyst for her newfound health obsession, but she had been all consumed with getting fit and healthy. She didn't give a damn about being thin or having a rocking body. Her body was already pretty damn sexy, she felt, but she did want to get stronger and feel better. It was mostly due to the stress she had been under both at work and in her personal life. She had never had a problem handling the stress load at work. That was something she loved and craved even. She had always been a workaholic and she was damn proud of it, but her personal life had always been a non-issue because she didn't really have one. Now, with the past few weeks of juggling two budding relationships, it had become rather difficult to deal with. And with the threats she had been receiving, it was getting to be a bit of a bear to deal with now. There had been 2 more since the first group. They always came in threes for some reason, but each message was always the same as the first one, and each one was making her more nervous, but she would not allow herself to be pushed around and to be pushed away from Alex. She had started to develop very strong feelings for him, and he was also experiencing strong feelings for her. She knew it. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the way that he touched her, and the romantic lovemaking they shared. It wasn't just
censored.
It was lovemaking. Of course, there had been a time or two when they had done nothing more than hardcore, quick, passionate.
Censored.
But for the most part they took their time and made sweet love. She knew it was cheesy as hell to think of it that way, and she almost wanted to smack herself upside the head because of it, but she was enjoying the whole experience way more than she wanted to admit to herself. Each email she received had been more detailed than the one before. The first message had read, "Stay away from him, cow." The second one said, "I'm going to cut you into little pieces if you don't get away from Alex Mathers." And the last one had been a direct threat that involved a plan. It was no longer a warning. It was a threat. "I'm going to kill you." Jess came to a stop at the finish line of the track, as the visual of that last email swam in her mind. Someone was going to kill her. She felt very alone and very afraid, but she would not admit it to anyone. Alex was very worried about her, and had basically refused to let her even live by herself until this person was apprehended. He had told her that she was going to be living at his place, and that was that, but Jess had refused his offer. That would be too much like hiding, and she was not going to let that happen. It was not in her nature to hide from anyone, no matter how scared she was. And she was terrified. She felt it in every molecule of her body, but she was not a quitter, and she did not allow anyone to scare her into submission. That was just not going to happen to her. Even as she felt the tears welling up in her eyes right then, she shook herself out of it and choked the tears back. If that psycho was watching her right now, she would never give them the satisfaction of knowing that she was crying in fear. Jess grabbed her water bottle from her gym bag sitting on the ground beside the finish line, and took a big gulp. It helped to snap her out of her temporary breakdown. She took a few deep breaths and picked up her bag. She looked over at the man sitting in the bleachers. He was watching her intently, and she thought she felt his gaze lingering on her in ways that was not quite professional. But she couldn't blame him. She was wearing a very sexy tight spandex gym outfit. Why work out if you weren't going to look good doing it, right? "Good run," the man spoke as she came closer. "It was. I really felt it today." The man's name was Detective Tim Packard. Jess had contacted the police about the threats, and she had noticed how the detective had taken an interest in her right away. She wasn't sure Alex had picked up on it, but she was certain that the detective wanted her in ways that weren't exactly professional. He had assigned himself as her primary bodyguard and protector, instead of stationing this task to a rookie officer, as was customary when someone was placed under police protection. Jess had not been immune to his charms entirely, but she would never act on her.
Censored.
Tim was the quintessential sexy cop, that you found on all of those detective shows on television. He looked like a male model, with his chiseled good looks, perfect hair and piercing gaze. He embodied the body language and demeanor of an alpha male twice his age, all wrapped up in the body of a 35-year-old. Jess had found herself fantasizing about him more than a few times. She couldn't help but feel a strong attraction to the man, but she was also very good at compartmentalizing her feelings. She knew that she would never betray what she had with Alex and the deep feelings she felt for him. Tim was just eye candy, and there was nothing wrong with that. As long as she didn't begin to entertain the notion of Tim being more than just a casual flirtation. That was where things could get messy, and she was determined to not let that happen. "It's a great discipline to get into," Tim said as he rose from the bleachers to follow behind Jess. Jess looked at the local college football field that was being lit up by the emerging sunshine. She loved it at this time of day. It was the best time to get a good workout in, because the world was still asleep, and the pressure of the day had not yet started to pin on your shoulders. She was just thankful that the school left the field open to the public at night. It was a nice gesture, and as far as she could tell, no one really used it at night except her. It was almost as if the universe had aligned so that she could have the use of this track all to herself every day. She knew that she could have achieved the same workout by going to the gym and running on a treadmill, but she hated being around a bunch of other people when she was working out, and she hated smelling the sweaty, stale air of a gym. It was like being in a nasty sardine can. She loved the fresh air, and she loved communing with nature. Tim quickened his speed so that he was now matching her stride for stride. She thought it was funny and cute how he almost seemed to be chasing after her at times, but other times he seemed very reserved, and almost like he was annoyed that he had to spend time with her. He did have other cases and other things on his plate, so occasionally Jess found herself under the direct care of Jimmy Woods, a rookie cop. He was cute, but had the personality of a stick. She found that when Tim wasn't there, she actually missed him a bit. Jess reached her car and said goodbye to Tim. She was going to work, so she didn't really require his protection there, but she knew that he would ask Jimmy or another officer to sit across the street and park on the curb so they could watch the parking lot of the law firm of Mathers and Clark for any suspicious activity. There was nothing to report so far, of course. Jess had told the cops how silly and what a waste of time it was. She did not leave the office for most of the day or most of the night most days. The only time she did leave the office at a relatively normal time was when she went out with Alex. Then she was with him all evening, usually spending the night at his place. But when she came out to get in her car to leave to go running, she would see Tim sitting there again. He seemed to prefer the early shift. She wondered when he slept. Jess had to admit that having Tim around made her feel safer than she had been feeling. She felt fine with Alex, but knowing that Tim was a trained police officer and he was looking out for her really increased her feelings of well-being. She would never tell Alex this, because she knew it would emasculate him. She knew enough about men to know that they all wanted to feel like providers and protectors. It was in their DNA, and if you were to threaten that, then they could get very paranoid and break down emotionally. As much fun as that sounded, Jess didn't really want to mess with it. She had a great thing going with Alex. Jess swung by her house, showered, and changed really quickly. In the shower, she had found herself briefly thinking about what it would be like for Detective Tim to come inside and wash her back for her. She imagined he would be more than happy to lend a hand. She laughed at her musings, and then chastised herself for mentally cheating on Alex. It was a harmless thought, but she noticed how turned on she was becoming thinking about it. She dismissed it from her mind as she went through her routine. Dressed and looking ready to kill, she wolfed down a quick breakfast of oatmeal with fruit and a few hard-boiled eggs that she had made at the beginning of the week. It was so easy to have a high-protein snack at the ready for her to munch on as she was heading out the door. Jess smiled at Tim and gave him an inadvertent wink as she hopped behind the wheel. She saw him smiling in her mirror as she sped away. He was right behind her, swerving and following closely until she pulled into work safe and sound. She gave him a slight wave as she walked into the building and headed towards her office. Tim drove off, most likely towards the police station. She knew that he would be sending his replacement any time now, and Tim would be spending a big part of his day trying to find out who was threatening Jess. It was turning out to be a monumental task. The email address being used to send the threats was fake, but Jess figured that. The IP address that was used to send them was also fake, which meant the perp knew how to cover their tracks well. This did not make Jess feel any safer by a long shot. She would have preferred to have a stupid stalker. If the psycho was clever, then they would have to find another way to get to them. She was going to be ready though. Jess made it to her office and switched on her computer. She had a lot of work to do this morning. She had actually finished up the Jones case and had won a favorable verdict that kept the dentist's good name out of the papers and did not imply any guilt on him. Basically, they had come to an agreement where he would pay the victims off. In LA, there was nothing that money could not buy. Jess had learned that the first week she had started working at the firm. The disgusting things people in that town got away with because of money were insane. She almost had to laugh at it, because if she had actually sat down to think about it, and the work she did to get these people free, it would have overwhelmed her with sadness, and she would not have liked herself very much. She wanted to scream sometimes, but when she saw the big fat paycheck arriving into the hands of the firm, and then a nice chunk of that going into her own pocket, she was suddenly okay with it. She realized this made her a despicable person in some ways, but a girl had to make a living. Jess was just getting into her routine while sipping her second cup of coffee, when she heard a knock at the door. She found a stopping point and looked up to find Alex standing there, wearing his trademark smirk. She had to smile, the man was so damn smooth. He could just give her that Alex look, and she found herself blushing like a schoolgirl. It
censored
her off, but it was also very sweet and she loved it. She hated that she loved it. Anything that made her feel vulnerable had a way of making her angry, but she found that with Alex, the anger paled in comparison to the joy she felt when she was with him. She was learning that as a woman, it was okay to be vulnerable at times. "How's it going?" Alex asked. He sauntered in and
censored
her sweetly. "It's going," Jess said. She settled back in her chair and let out a sigh. She had been going over the notes for a new case, and some of the details were a little fuzzy. She hated to be interrupted when she was making notes about important things she had to discuss with the client. It was very difficult to get her mind back in the zone after the interruptions that Alex was always throwing her way. She realized that he was her boss, and he could just tell her to take a break whenever he wanted, but it was still annoying. And she had expressed her displeasure to Alex, but he continued to do it. In fact, she was starting to think that he did it even more just to irritate her. She wanted to be mad at him, but for some reason she found the surly behavior adorable. She hated that. "You lose your shadow?" Alex asked. "What?" "Oh yeah. The detective has allowed me to enter the building unescorted. I feel so blessed for the freedom," Jess joked. Alex smiled as he massaged her shoulders gently. "He is just doing his job to make sure you stay safe," Alex said. "I know, but it is a bit much. I can take care of myself. I'm not sure I would have reported it if I'd known that I'd be followed around like a prisoner. It is starting to affect my concentration at work. We had to report it. Who knows what kind of a psycho this person might actually be? They might be serious about hurting you. I know, but I can't live in fear. That is no way to live at all. I need to chill a bit, you know. The stress of everything is starting to box me in." "Ah, poor baby," Alex said. Jess shot him a confused look, until she realized he was being sarcastic. "Joker," she joked, hitting him playfully on the arm. "What?" "Way to be supportive," Jess replied. Alex smiled. "I try. How about you try to leave me alone so I can get some work done?" Alex moved his hand from her shoulder to cup her.
censored
Softly. She felt an immediate jolt of
censored
which she quickly dismissed as she elbowed him in the ribs. "This is not the place for that," Jess said. "You just assaulted your boss, Missy. I'm going to have to put this in your performance evaluation at the end of the year," Alex said as he walked towards the door. "You have fun with that," Jess called after him. He dropped back into the doorway. "What?" Jess snapped. "I almost forgot why I came in here. I got a few tickets to the Foo Fighters show tonight. Front row seating, we are there." "Foo Fighters? Seriously? They are my favorite band," Jess said. Alex smiled. "I know. I'll pick you up at 6. "I have a lot of work to do," Jess said. "You always have a lot of work to do. That isn't going to change. That is the nature of the business." "I know, which is why I need you to go away and let me do stuff," Jess said. "Who's stopping you?" Alex called as he wandered down the hall. Jess watched him go before turning her attention back to her work. She was really excited about the concert. She had not been to a rock show in a few years. It had probably been college the last time she really let her hair down and had some crazy fun. She shuddered thinking about it, and scolded herself for not having more of a life. But it seemed that every time she tried to get a life together, then something always came up and ruined it. She had been jaded too many times by too many of the wrong guys. She'd had to focus on her career to achieve her goals. It never occurred to her that one of those goals was keeping her heart safe by placing it in an iron vault and throwing it in the bottom of the ocean where it could never be touched or harmed again. She noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. Alex had carelessly left her door open, and she didn't feel like getting up to shut it. Through the open door, she noticed Dean coming out of the copy room with a handful of pages. He glanced up at her before he walked into his office. There was a cold and dead look behind his eyes. She had rarely seen him look so cold and unfeeling. It sent a small shiver up her back as she tried to remove her gaze from his. He was obviously still
censored
about the fact that he had lost her to Alex. It was times like this when Jess was sure she had made the right choice after all. Dean seemed to be acting very childish and insecure about the whole thing. There was a part of her mind that had suspected him of sending the threats to her, but she couldn't bring herself to believe it for a second. Dean was being a childish baby in some ways about the whole thing, but he wasn't the kind of guy who would waste time trying to scare her. Jess liked to think she could read people pretty well. You had to, if you were going to be a good lawyer. It came with the territory, and the vibe she got from Dean was nothing monstrous. In fact, she was still very attracted to him, and she found herself still wrestling over whether or not she had chosen correctly in all of this. It was a difficult decision to make, and she cared deeply for Alex and was thrilled to be with him, but a part of her wanted Dean too. She wished that it had been possible to combine the two together into one perfect man, but that idea was ridiculous. She had made her decision, and she was happy with it. As she was just getting back into things with her work, her phone rang on her desk. She stared at it and wished it would burst into flames before she answered. "Jess? It's Detective Tim Packard." "Hey, Detective. What's up? I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, I was just taking a break," Jess lied. The man's voice sounded even smoother and sexier over the phone. Jess had always been a sucker for a deep, thick voice. It reminded her of her penchant for other thick things. "Great. The reason I called is that I may have found a lead on the person threatening you." "Really? That's great." "Yeah, but right now it's just a person of interest. We checked out an ex-girlfriend of Alex's, and our tech guys were able to trace her email activity at the time the messages were sent to a DNS server with an anti-trace mask on it." "I thought you couldn't trace it." "You tried already, right?" "Yes, the IP address was being blocked, but I have some friends in the FBI Cyber Tech Division who were able to do some magic and uncover it anyway. It just took a bit longer, and they weren't sure they were able to do it. Turns out our perp isn't as sophisticated as we originally thought." "That's fantastic. And you think it's this person?" Veronica Daniels is her name. It is possible that her phone could have been cloned, or that someone placed some sort of malware on her PC so they could hack into her email, and also so they could share her IP address. So we don't know it's her for sure yet. Okay, I really appreciate you keeping me in the loop. No problem. I'll get back to you as soon as we have any other developments, Tim said. Sounds great. Jess hung up the phone and went back to work, but her thoughts were never far from Detective Tim Packard. Chapter 2. The music thumped loudly in Jess's ears, until it felt like her brains were melting and were going to come dribbling out of her facial cavities any second. Despite being so loud that she had lost all conscious thought, the music was still being played with perfect clarity. She just went with it. The whole atmosphere was more fun than she remembered from her college days. The lights and the smoke machines, the crowd jumping up and down and cheering, several people crowd surfing being passed directly over her head, the bass thumping in her,
Censored.
causing vibrations to reverberate through her entire body. It was all amazing. She loved it, and she wished she had never stopped doing it. She made a pact right then that she was going to start doing this at least once a month. Alex slapped her on the ass and then pulled her close to him. She laughed at his juvenile antics and grabbed his ass right back. He smiled at her with that sexy grin of his and licked his lips. He enjoyed having his ass slapped a little too much, she knew. She loved to squeeze his tight buns, and she did so as often as she could. On stage, the Foo Fighters singer, Dave Grohl, ran from one end to the other swinging his guitar wildly as the other drummer launched them into a breakdown. They were doing one of the new songs that no one had yet heard, since Dave said they were getting ready to start working on a new album. Jess had been a Foo Fighters fan ever since the first album. There was something about their music that really spoke to her. It apparently spoke to a lot of people, since they repeatedly broke attendance records everywhere they played. There was just something about the artistry and the energy they brought to every show that made you a true fan for life. Having fun? Alex yelled. Yes. This is amazing. Alex began grinding on her a bit, and she grinded on him right back. It wasn't the typical type of song you would grind to, but it had a pretty funky vibe to it. Besides, she never needed an excuse to grind on Alex Mathers. He pulled up his shirt slightly, revealing the tight abs he crunched an hour a day to sculpt, and she ran her fingertips slowly over them, tracing every nuance and muscular ripple. She was getting very turned on, and she could see Alex was too. The question was, what were they going to do about it? The back of Alex's SUV was plenty roomy and spacious, and she found herself feeling a whole new level of appreciation for the tinted windows. Jess had not had
Censored.
in the back of a car since college. She was revisiting some old ground here tonight, and she was enjoying every second of it. She hated to miss the last few songs of the concert, but she couldn't stand it anymore. She was too turned on, and she had to have Alex right now.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
One thought stayed with her through the evening, lingering in the back of her head. When she and Alex had left the concert parking lot, Jess had glanced around to see if any people were paying attention to them and their rocking vehicle. She only saw one person, Detective Tim Packard. He was sitting on the hood of his car, just about 50 feet from where they had parked. He was looking at her intently. When their eyes met, he smiled at her. Had he been enjoying the show? It certainly looked that way. Jess's feet pounded the pavement on the track, finishing the last few strides of her run. The world spun around in its increasingly familiar kind of way, and she felt the routine nausea that threatened to soil the track beneath her feet, but she held it together. She was rather proud of herself for having a perfect record of not puking, even though she definitely could have. She grabbed for her water bottle and chugged half of it, letting the excess that would not fit in her mouth roll out of the corners and down her chin. I think you missed a few drops. Jess shot him an angry look, but Detective Tim Packard's smile never faded. He kept at her with that steely gaze that she found intimidating and primal. It stirred a very special kind of beast in her, and she wondered what it would look and feel like to unleash it. Would it be different than she had with Alex? Better? She tried to push the thought out of her mind. Jess picked up her bag and began walking towards the car. She wasn't totally sure why she was angry with Tim. Was it because he had watched her and Alex while they had
censored
in the SUV? Was it just because he was always there and his welcome had started to wear a little thin? Or was it because she was developing feelings for him, just as she was getting her love life in order? She guessed it was probably a combination of all three things. Bad workout? You seem to be giving it some pretty good intensity out there, Tim said, walking behind her. Do you always have to follow me around? I'm a big girl, I can take care of myself, Jess snapped at him. Hey, I'm just doing my job. Do you know how many grown-ups that can take care of themselves, but still get hurt every day in this world? That's why the cops exist, because most capable people can't handle everything themselves. Jess opened the trunk of her car and threw her bag inside. She slammed the trunk closed and glared at Tim. He didn't flinch. In fact, if she didn't know better, she could swear he found it sexy. I'm not ordinary, Jess said as she opened her car door and slid behind the wheel. I know that. You are anything but ordinary. Jess stopped just then and looked up at Tim, who was still burrowing into her with that steely gaze that sat atop the sexiest smirking smile she had ever seen. God, what was it with this guy? She was finding everything he did irresistibly sexy. Jess shut the door and drove home. Tim caught up with her within 3 blocks, and she was tempted to break a bunch of traffic laws to lose the dork, but she decided against it. He would probably write her up a bunch of citations, and she would find that sexy as well. Jess pulled into her house and went inside. Tim parked right across the street from her. She pretended not to notice. It was time that she finally just pretended the man was not there watching her every step. It was very creepy having someone there all the time, but she was not going to let him ruin her night. She stepped inside and began to peel off her sweaty clothes. She was hoping to be done and showered before 11. Her muscles
censored
heavily as she struggled with the clingy, sweaty clothes. She had worked out that morning and decided that she was in the mood to do it again tonight. It was the first time she had ever worked out twice in one day, and the first time she had gone running at night since she had started her new regimen. It was exhilarating, and she found that she was really getting into it. The way her whole body felt alive afterwards and throughout the day was indescribable, and she was getting way more work done in a much quicker amount of time. As long as morons didn't interrupt her, she was able to really focus and concentrate with a much higher precision than she had before. She was shocked to see Tim following her to the track, since he had done the same that morning. She was really starting to wonder if the man had a home to go to. A homeless cop? That was a first. Jess stood and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, before walking into the bathroom to take a much-needed shower. She had not weighed herself or even paid much attention to any physical changes that might have been occurring in her body, but she suddenly looked a lot thinner and leaner. She thought it was impossible to see improvements that quickly, but it was happening. She grabbed her bathroom scale and stepped on it. She had lost 12 pounds in a little over a week. She was conflicted on how to feel. On one hand, she had made peace with the fact that she was a big girl, and she was perfectly happy with it. She had not undergone a physical workout routine to lose weight. She had done it for her physical and emotional health. It was a great way to deal with stress, and if physical changes happened, she was okay with that. She put the bathroom scale away and hopped in the shower. The water was hot and refreshing on her skin. As she leaned back, letting the water soothe her aching muscles, she felt a sense of calm pull over her. Her thoughts were tranquil and she felt totally at peace. It was her favorite part of working out, she decided. There was nothing finer than just letting it all wash away as she stood under the hot water, feeling it invade every nook and cranny in her body. She thought about Tim and wished he was there with her as her hands rubbed over her soapy
censored
and her ass, wishing they were his strong, rugged hands. She knew that she shouldn't be feeling this way, but she couldn't help it, and she tried to shut those feelings off. She felt so guilty thinking about it that she couldn't stand it. That was one of the reasons she had increased the intensity and duration of her runs, she decided. It was just something else for her to be stressed about. It couldn't happen. She really cared for Alex. At this point, she was sure that she was basically in love with him. It had been so long since she had felt love that she wasn't even sure how to do it anymore. Sometimes she felt like she was pushing Alex away, but he had not acted any differently around her. In fact, he was even more affectionate and romantic than he had been since the threats had started. She took this to mean that he really cared about her, and that he was very concerned. Of course, being the macho type of guy he was, he would never tell her that. Jess turned off the water of the shower and wrung her hair out a bit. Then she pulled back the shower curtain. Her body instantly lurched backwards, slamming her back against the wall. Her heart began to beat rapidly in her.
Censored.
And her breathing became very shallow, coming in short, quick gasps. There, finger written on the vanity mirror in red, was a message that read, "Enjoy your last days. You are mine, cow." That had not been there a few minutes ago. Someone was in her house. She locked the bathroom door and grabbed her phone off the sink. Jess grabbed her robe off the bathroom door and called Tim. He rushed inside. Chapter 3. Tim handed a cup of hot tea to Jess and sat down on the couch, placing his own tea on the coffee table in front of them. He looked at Jess intently, but did not say anything for a few minutes. Jess did not encourage conversation either. She wanted to rest and enjoy a few minutes of peace and quiet. Her nerves were shot, and she just wanted to sip her tea. The person had actually been in her house. She could not shake this idea or the feeling. She had not called Alex yet, but she wanted to. She was wrestling with taking him up on his offer to move in with him until this person was apprehended, but the stubborn Jessica Bilson deep inside of her would just not allow her to roll over and give up. She was not wired that way. It just wasn't going to happen. Finally, Tim spoke. "Are you okay?" Jess smiled her best phony smile and nodded yes. "Good. I understand the shock you've been through, but you are safe now." "I don't feel safe. This person broke into my home and waited for me. They could have killed me." "But they didn't," Tim said. "Maybe they don't mean me any real harm then? Is that what you are saying?" Tim took a sip of his tea and set it back down. "Not exactly. You can't get a false sense of security and think that because this person didn't hurt you now that they won't hurt you later. They might just be toying with you." "What am I going to do? Why can't you catch this freak?" "We are doing all we can. I just checked the station about the results of the Veronica Daniels investigation. It turns out that someone did hack her PC and used her IP address to send those messages. She didn't do it." Jess felt tears welling up in her eyes, and she struggled hard to swallow them back down, turning her head away as a few lonely tears escaped her clutches and rolled down her face. She hated to display this weak side of her to anybody, and she hated to give in to her vulnerability like this. It was sad and pathetic. If her dad saw her crying like a little girl right now, she knew the lecture he would give her. "It's okay. We will find out who is doing this." Tim took her hand in his and held it gently. His touch felt good and reassuring. She looked at him and saw a gentle soulfulness in his eyes that she had not seen yet. It was a nice change on him, and she saw for the first time what a good man he really was. He was a good cop, and he was a good friend to have. He reached up with his left hand and, using just one finger, wiped a tear away from her eye as it rolled down her cheek, catching it just under her cheekbone. His thick, strong finger elicited several responses in her all at once, and they added up to a feeling of comfort she had been lacking lately. No matter how tough she pretended to be, when it was all said and done, deep beneath the surface, she had a vulnerable spot. And this person had tapped into it by terrorizing her. She felt like a victim for the first time, and it enraged her. She was not going to go down without a fight. She wanted to find this person and do violent things to them. She was not a violent person, but when push came to shove, she came to destroy. I know. It's just that something like this tends to rock your world in a very uncomfortable way, Jess replied. I know that. You going to move in with Alex? You told me that he had suggested it before. Might not be a bad idea in the meantime. No. I'm not going to let them have this victory. I will not be pushed out of my house. I understand, but I would at least suggest installing a security system. I have a friend in the business that can get you a great deal if you tell him I sent you. Thanks. I appreciate that. Jess had actually never thought of getting a system installed. She lived in a safe neighborhood, and she just didn't feel it was warranted. She would call them first thing in the morning. Did you call Alex at least? Did you tell him what happened? Jess wasn't sure why Tim was so preoccupied with Alex all of a sudden, but she paid it no mind. No, I didn't want to freak him out. He would insist I come over and spend the night, and he would insist I move in. Well, might not be a bad idea to spend the night there at least. That way you could get some sleep. I doubt you will sleep here now tonight, Tim said. Well, if you don't mind hanging out with me, I'd like to stay here tonight. I'm enjoying just sitting here. Just keep the tea coming. Tim smiled. That sounds like a plan, he said. Jess awoke sometime just after dawn with the bright sunshine glaring on her face. The warmth felt great for a moment, until she opened her eyes and the blinding light began to burn her retinas. She squinted, shutting her eyes as tightly as she could, and rolled up off the couch to a sitting-up position. She just realized that her head had been lying on Tim's shoulder. She thought he was asleep as well, until he moved his head slowly, looking at her with eyes that were wide awake. He had stayed awake all night and looked after her, and he had not bothered to move her head from his shoulder. She wondered what that actually meant as she moved closer to the edge of the couch. She certainly didn't want to give him the wrong idea. She was finding herself more and more attracted to him all the time, but she knew that it was not meant to be. She had made a choice to be with Alex, and when she really searched her heart, she found that he was the one she wanted to be with. This had just confirmed the whole thing for her. It all looked so simple now. The choice really wasn't a choice at all, and she hoped she had not led Tim on in any way. He really was a great guy. You okay? Tim asked. Jess smiled awkwardly. Yeah, I guess I'm still a little shaken up, Jess said. That's understandable. But you are safe now. Thanks. Sorry about lying on your shoulder. I guess I was more tired than I thought. That's no problem, Tim said. He leaned closer to Jess. He reached out and touched her hand softly, holding her hand in his. She slowly turned her head, locking eyes on him. He was so beautiful that she could hardly think right then, but as he leaned forward to
censored
her, the senses snapped back into being, and she realized what was happening. Jess turned her head and stood up, leaving Tim puckering and leaning in awkwardly. He didn't seem to feel awkward, though. He smiled and gave her a puzzled look. What's wrong? Tim asked. This can't happen. I'm sorry? We can't be together that way. I'm involved. With Alex, I know. Well, then you should understand why we can't pursue this. Tim leaned back and thought a moment before speaking. You know what I see when I look at you? A beautiful woman who is not happy. You think you are happy with a guy like Alex because he offers security, and you know what he's all about. You know what to expect from him. But then you meet a guy like me, and you don't know what to expect. I'm not nearly as cookie-cutter perfect, and that scares you. You don't frighten easily, but this has you scared. Maybe it does. But I know what I want, and I can't do this. Don't let go of something that could be amazing, because you are unable to conquer your fears. Jess was getting a little steamed at being told who she was and what she wanted. I know what I want. I have made a decision. You and I cannot be together that way. It won't happen, no matter what you say. I'm sorry. Tim stood up and carried his cup of tea to the kitchen. He grabbed his jacket and started to head out the door. I'll leave a few units stationed outside your home and to tail you to work. I'm going to be in the office most of the day following up any possible leads on this. We will find out who is behind it. Just have a bit of faith in us." With that, he walked out the door casually as if the previous conversation had never happened. Jess had never met a man who was so sure of himself that he literally could not be rejected. She supposed she should be glad that he wasn't going to get all drama queen on this thing, but she couldn't help but feel a little insulted because he wasn't more upset over the rejection she had just delivered. She never wanted to hurt anybody, but it kind of made her wonder how much he cared if he didn't care ultimately about being brushed off. Or maybe he figured that it would work out eventually, and he had no reason to push it. If that was the case, then he knew more about things than she did. Jess got dressed and went to work. That was about the only thing she could do. She had to keep everything as normal as she possibly could. She would not let someone force her into a corner or isolate her from her life. That was exactly what this pervert wanted, and she was going to be damned if she would allow them to win. Alex called her into his office when she arrived at work. As soon as she walked through the door, he wrapped his arms around her. It felt amazing to be held and comforted, even though she had not told him about what had happened the night before. She wondered if he had found out some other way. Had Tim told him just to make her mad and mess with her head? She pushed that ridiculous thought out of her head instantly. "Are you okay, babe?" Alex asked. His voice was more comforting and reassuring than she had ever heard it, and Jess had to wonder what was up. There had to be something going on that he was not telling her. "I'm fine. Are you okay?" Jess asked. "Yeah, I'm great. I just didn't get a chance to talk with you last night. I was here at the office late, catching up on some stuff. I just didn't want you to feel like I was ignoring you or anything." "No, it's okay. I needed some time alone to just clear my head." "I'll bet. The stress has to be getting to you. I'm amazed at how well you are holding up." "I'm managing just fine, honey," Jess said. She was not sure that she had ever called Alex honey before. It felt good and somehow reassuring. He smiled at the word. Were they becoming one of those lame couples, she wondered? It was funny if they were, actually. Deep down, she had always wanted to be a part of something cheesy. She read her Danielle Steele, just like every other girl in the world. "Well, I think I should take you somewhere this weekend to celebrate." "That's not necessary. I would rather stay in this weekend and just relax. I've got a bit of work to do, but other than that it feels like a Netflix and chill kind of weekend," Jess said. "Okay, well that's cool," Alex replied. He really didn't seem to care that she wanted to relax that weekend, which was a relief. "It's been a while since we did anything like that. Let's just be lazy and grab some pizza, beers and watch good TV," Jess said. She pulled Alex close and
Censored.
him sweetly on the lips. "That does sound like fun, baby. It has been a long time since I did that." Jess.
Censored.
Him again, more gingerly and more passionately. The rest of that Friday went according to schedule. Jess met with her new clients on the new case she had been assigned, and she was relieved to find that it appeared they were actually innocent of any wrongdoing, and the evidence was not going to be strong enough to land a conviction. That made her job a lot easier, and the clients were not lying through their teeth, so she didn't expect any slip-ups or weird occurrences to throw a wrench into things. She finished up the day, went home and got ready to go to the track. She found that the running was starting to become enough of a routine that she didn't really even have to think about it, or psych herself into doing it. It just felt right, and that her day wasn't complete without doing it. She was even getting used to doing it twice a day. Now that she was doing this, it seemed to amplify the effects, and she felt twice as energized and totally stress-free. Even though she had been scared out of her mind with the whole stalker business, she was feeling pretty encouraged right now. She wanted to find this person and look them in the eye, even if she had to take them down herself. She waved to the police patrol as they parked across the street from her home. She wasn't familiar with the new guy, and she found herself missing Tim. She wondered if she had
censored
him off that badly, or if he really was working hard on breaking some leads on her case. She imagined it was a combination of both. Unless he had really found something. In that case, she would take his absence as a good thing. She had just taken off her business clothes and was admiring herself in the mirror when her phone rang. She saw it was Tim and answered it quickly. "Hey," Jess answered. "Hey, I've got big news." "What? You found them?" Tim paused a moment before answering. "Yes," he said. "That's fantastic. Who is it? How did you find them?" "The perpetrator is a woman named Sharon Williams." "I don't know anyone by that name. Why would she want to threaten me?" Sharon was an intern at the firm of Mathers and Clark a few years ago. She had a brief affair with Alex. They went out a few times, and she wanted more of a commitment, but he wasn't having any of it, I guess. She began driving away clients and basically trying to hurt Alex's name, so she was let go. She has been keeping an eye on Alex ever since then, and for whatever reason she chose you as her target of rage. She is a sadistic freak, basically. Wow, so she was really going to kill me? My guess is that eventually she would have worked herself up into enough of a frenzy that your life would have been in danger. Jess sat down on the bed. She wanted to cry as she heard the words coming from Tim's mouth. The thought that someone out there actually wanted to kill her made her want to crawl under the bed. She took a few deep breaths. "How did you catch her?" "Well, last night when she entered your house, she did it as the shift changed between me and the officer who was taking my place when I went to follow you to the track. The moron left his car unattended while he went behind a tree to urinate. When we reviewed the camera footage from the dashboard camera, we saw a shadowy figure enter the house by picking the lock. She was dressed all in black but not wearing a mask. I guess she didn't want to draw attention to herself if a neighbor happened to be watching. Anyway, her face was reflected in the living room glass window on the front of your house. We were able to use face recognition software and track her down that way. She has a few priors from when she was a teenager, so she was in our database." "Wow, so it is finally over." "Yeah, you can rest easy now." "Thanks, Tim." "Thanks for everything," Jess said. "You're more than welcome. This might sound weird, but I'm going to miss you." "I'm going to miss you too." "And I'm sorry," Jess said. "Don't be. You and Alex take good care of each other, but if it doesn't work out, you know where to find me. I'd like to invite you for a cup of coffee, if that ever happens." "Okay, that sounds great. Bye, Jess." "Bye." Jess stepped out of her house and waved goodbye to the police cruiser that had been parked there as it drove off down the street. She felt a weight rising up off her shoulders, and she noticed for the first time in weeks how beautiful everything was. The weather was starting to warm up, and she was going to enjoy as much of everything as she possibly could. She jogged to the track and had herself a great workout. The next day, she was lazing on the couch at Alex's mansion. He had the most comfortable sofa she had ever had the privilege of parking her
censored
on. It sank down with you as you sat down and molded to every subtle nuance of your body, offering just the right amount of support. Once you were in there, you never wanted to get out of it. It was really that amazing. Alex lay beside her, with his shoulder underneath her head. She loved to lie against him and just relax. His body was so warm and inviting that she could just use him as a human pillow for hours, and she often did after.
censored
But even without the
censored
it was amazing. They agreed to watch several goofy movies that neither had ever seen before. Jess had to admit to herself that it felt weird to not be stressed about something, and even weirder to be wasting a Saturday on meaningless drivel and not getting up off the couch. She had not done this since college, but she was glad she was enjoying it. She was learning that as an overachiever, she needed to stop and smell the coffee once in a while. The experience of the past several weeks had taught her that it was the little things in life that you had to take time out to enjoy, or else you would miss them completely. She loved her job, and she loved the fact that she was moving up in the company. Her superiors had almost assured her of this based on her work, and it was refreshing knowing that she was working towards something specific with every case that she won. Alex got off the couch and grabbed another couple of beers for the two of them. Jess grabbed the bottle and took a huge gulp. It felt good to just let loose and let the beer do its thing as she poured it down her gullet. She realized she was not being very ladylike, but she figured she was allowed to let go of that stuffy stereotype every now and then. Alex seemed to find it charming. "So, how does it feel to be officially stalker-free?" Alex asked. "Pretty good," Jess replied. "Just pretty good?" "I figured it would feel amazing," Alex said. "Well, it does, but I like to be modest about things," Jess joked. "Well, modesty does suit you just fine. You should try it more often." Jess slapped his arm playfully. "Joker." Alex laughed good-naturedly. "So you don't have any more psycho women you have
censored
off recently, do you? Any other stalkers in the midst I should know about?" Alex shook his head. "I don't believe so." "Well, you had better hope not. I'm not going through that again. If another psycho woman wants you that badly, then she can just have you." "Oh, I see how it is. I can't imagine you didn't think of her when you were going through the lists of potential people that could have been stalking me," Jess said. "I thought she was in an institution or something. That was the last I heard of her." "Well, apparently she got out. You still might have mentioned it." "I'm sorry." "I'll make it up to you," Alex said. "How?" "I'll pay for the pizza next time," Alex replied. "What do you mean next time? Did you use my credit card for this?" Jess asked. "Sort of." Jess burst out laughing. "I'm going to kill you." "Now who is the psycho?" Jess wrapped her fingers around Alex's neck and pretended to strangle him before pulling him close for a
censored.
Jess often found herself thinking about the past several weeks and how everything had played out. Her feelings and loyalties had been tested by 3 different men, but she had chosen Alex over the others. And she was proud of that choice. It was true that your heart would never steer you wrong, and so far she was living proof of that. The next night, Alex asked Jess to go out to a nice dinner aboard his yacht. She had never been on a yacht before, and she was flabbergasted at how romantic and amazing it had been. Alex had a great meal catered on board before they drifted off into the bay. Jess had never really acquired an affinity for boats or the water, but she was starting to feel pretty special, drifting slowly along on Alex's yacht. The food was amazing, and Alex couldn't have handpicked a more perfect night. The evening was warm, ushering the first remnants of spring, and the sky was clear with a huge full moon shining down on them. After the main course followed by the most amazing tiramisu she had ever eaten, Alex surprised her yet again. The man was always keeping her on her toes, and tonight he didn't disappoint, as he asked her to close her eyes. When she opened them, Alex was on one knee, with the biggest diamond ring she had ever seen held out in front of her. He asked her to marry him, and Jess immediately said yes. She said yes, before she even knew that the answer would be yes. As Alex scooped her up in his arms and held her closely, she found herself wishing that she had not waited so long to embrace this man in her life. But she knew that time had a plan for everything. And it was time for the next step. Thank you for reading my book. If you like this story, I think you'll enjoy my author friend's book. Get your free copy of Dark Desire now. A big favor to ask. I would really love it if you could take a few seconds to leave me a review. Thank you so much in advance. About the author. Selena Coffey is a romance writer who lives happily in London with her husband and son. She is a hopeless romantic who grew up always believing in love, and she is not ashamed to admit this. It is this belief that makes her so passionate about writing crazy love stories. A stereotypical girly girl, she loves shopping. So whenever she gets a chance and the spare cash, you will probably find her browsing online for the next pair of shoes to add to her collection. You can find her online at www.selinacoffee.com. Contact her at hello@selinacoffee.com. Closing credits. This has been Playing the Bosses. Written by Selina Coffee. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited. Production copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited.